Chapter 37-39. Xiaohua touched his nose and smiled. Just because I don't make a move doesn't mean others won't make a move. Who else can make a move? Zhang Daoran was puzzled as he looked at Fu Jiwen, Xue Ping, and the others in the distance. Zhai Xingzi didn't disturb them. When Zhang Daoran looked at Fu Jiwen and Xue Ping, he immediately observed their expressions and smiled. Fu Jiwen, come over here. Yes, senior. Fu Jiwen was startled and flew over. Zhang Daoran stopped transmitting and looked at Fu Jiwen, asking curiously. Brother Xiao, you said it was Fu Jiwen who made a move? Of course it's him. Who else could it be? Xiaohua said with a smile. Xiaohua's stingy and protective nature was revealed again. Although he couldn't make a move now, he still didn't forget to pull his disciple into the group. If he had directly asked Fu Jiwen to make a move, Zhang Daoran and Sun Kong might have objected. But now, even if they wanted to object, looking at the injuries of Taoist Master Di Quan and the others, they naturally felt that Fu Jiwen was qualified to get a share of the loot. They couldn't help but mutter in their hearts. Since they didn't say anything, with Fu Jiwen's seniority, no matter if he got a magic treasure or elixir, others wouldn't treat him badly. Sure enough, Sun Kong frowned and said with some displeasure. Brother Xiao is joking, right? What can Fu Jiwen do? Gij. Gusuchiodi also understood Xiaohua's thoughts and covered her mouth with a smile. Taoist Master Xiao, you're really Gu Clan. The men of Gu Clan are all good men, Xiaohua said with a smile. You female cultivators must cherish them. That's. Gusuchiodi looked sweetly at Zhai Xingzi and said, This concubine understands better than anyone. What can this brat do? Gong Shuisen also asked coldly. Fu Jiwen naturally understood what Xiaohua was thinking. He stood there quietly and didn't say anything. Xiaohua ordered indifferently. Fu Jiwen, take out the thunder amplification wood. Yes, senior. Seeing that there were outsiders, Fu Jiwen immediately changed the way he addressed Xiaohua and took out the wooden box made from the thunder amplification wood. How's the time? Xiaohua seemed to have a plan and asked with a smile. If nothing unexpected happens, there should still be a few more moments. Fu Jiwen replied respectfully. And? Xiaohua nodded. Then let's wait a little longer. Taoist Master Xiao. Zhai Xingzi sighed helplessly. If the pills are taken out, how are we going to distribute them? You've given us a huge problem. Brother Zhai Xing. Hearing Zhai Xingzi's confident tone, Zhang Daoran asked in bewilderment. Can't we just go with what we discussed earlier? What do you mean by that? Right, let's do as Brother Daoran said. Xiaohua smiled and said, Fu Jiwen is a junior, so he should have the awareness of a junior. Don't you agree, Fu Jiwen? Yes, I will listen to your instructions. Fu Jiwen was even more cooperative than Zhai Xingzi. Zhai Xingzi looked at Gusuchiodi helplessly and shook his head. Chiao, or this time, we are basking in Fu Jiwen's glory. Let's bask in it. In the past, this concubine also basked in it a lot. In the future, this concubine will probably bask in it as well. Gusuchiodi smiled like a little fox. At worst, we'll just give Fu Jiwen some more benefits. Sister. Gong Shuisen was unhappy and said loudly. What do you mean? Can Fu Jiwen break the restriction? If Taoist Master Xiao says he can, then he can. Gusuchiodi also started to keep them in suspense. Sun Kong seemed to have realized something and looked at Fu Jiwen up and down. However, Zhang Daoran was still not at ease. He smiled and said, Since Fu Jiwen is going to help Taoist Master Xiao break the restriction, then, how are we going to cooperate with Fu Jiwen? Xiaohua shook his head mysteriously and said, What Brother Daoran wants to do is indeed very important. Because you have to choose which restriction to break first. Ah? Even though Zhang Daoran was half a step into the out-of-aperture realm, he did not have the slightest confidence in breaking the restriction. Now that he heard Xiaohua's tone, it was as if the treasure in the restriction was in his hands. He could not help but be shocked. He. Seeing that he had enough of showing off, Xiaohua's expression became serious. He coughed and said, Fellow Taoists, let's follow our previous discussion and stand still. All right. Gusichiodi was the first to agree. She pulled Jai Xingzi to stand at a corner of the jade table. However, Gusichiodi did not take out any imperial equipment, while Jai Xingzi took out Falling Star. Of course, what puzzled Taoist Master Di Quan and the others was that Jai Xingzi did not use his nascent soul. Since Jai Xingzi moved, although Sun Kong and Zhang Daoran were puzzled, they also took out their magic weapons and stood in front of the jade table. Seeing that Gusichiodi did not take out her imperial equipment, Gong Shuisen was a bit hesitant. She did not know if she should take out her imperial equipment like what they discussed before. Seeing this, Gusichiodi smiled and said, "These are all Taoist treasures. You and I have no use for them. We can help. However, Jai Xingzi and the others want to take the pills first. We don't have to interfere." All right. Gong Shuisen was also full of doubts and stood beside Gusichiodi. "Senior Xiao, it's time," Fu Jiwen reminded in a low voice. "Do it." Xiao Hua nodded. Fu Jiwen received Xiao Hua's order and carefully opened the Yanlei wooden box in his hand. The Heaven Punishment Prison crystal was revealed in midair. Heaven Punishment Prison. Gong Shuisen was from a famous sect and recognized the Heaven Punishment Prison crystal at a glance. She could not help but call out. However, after calling out 3 words, she immediately felt something was wrong and quickly shut her mouth. Her gaze looked very frantically at Xiao Hua and then at Gusichiodi. She really did not think that Gusichiodi and Xiao Hua actually had something to do with the Immortal Palace's Heaven Punishment Prison crystal. This was a great crime against the immortal law. "Carefully place it above the restriction," Xiao Hua instructed in a low voice. "Yes, senior." A kind of warmth appeared in Fu Jiwen's eyes. He slowly placed the Heaven Punishment Prison crystal 1 chi above the restriction. "Slowly descend," Xiao Hua instructed again. "Yes, senior." Fu Jiwen still complied. As the Heaven Punishment Prison crystal slowly approached the restriction, the hearts of Zhang Daoran and the others were all in suspense. "Hold on tight. When it's about time, let go," Xiao Hua reminded Fu Jiwen. "Yes." Fu Jiwen stared closely at the Heaven Punishment Prison crystal. His fingers slowly loosened. "Gotcha." Just as everyone was staring at the Heaven's Punishment Prison crystal, several bolts of lightning suddenly appeared. They were like horned dragons that appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The moment these bolts of lightning appeared, they immediately attacked the Heaven's Punishment Prison crystal from all directions. However, just before these thunderbolts appeared, Fu Jiwen's fingers loosened. The Heaven Punishment Prison crystal landed on the restriction of the jade bottle. Although most of the thunderbolts landed on the Heaven Punishment Prison crystal, there were still some that affected the restriction. Rumble! The fine thunderbolts that had just injured the 2 nascent soul stage cultivators also flashed out from the restriction and struck the Heaven Punishment Prison crystal. Wang! The Heaven Punishment Prison crystal made a rumbling sound in the lightning threads. Inscribed chains floated and overflowed from the lightning threads. A kind of indescribable solemnity, a kind of orderly and irresistible feeling was born from these chains. Waves of purple thunderbolts followed these inscribed chains and landed on the restriction that dared to challenge them. Gotcha! Rumble! Endless rumbles sounded on the jade table. Not only were Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong dumbstruck, but even Taoist Master Di Quan and Taoist Master Han were dumbstruck. Even Fairy Xiangfeng, who originally wanted to take advantage of the chaos to sneak attack Xiao Hua, opened her mouth slightly and threw her plan aside. She blankly watched the entanglement and struggle between the Heaven Punishment Lightning of the Immortal Palace and the Heaven Punishment Lightning of the Tao Sex Tribulation Transcending Stage Cultivator. Xiao Hua was really a little proud. Xing Langzi was a Tribulation Transcending Stage Cultivator, but he was much weaker than the Immortal Palace, let alone the Heaven Punishment Lightning of the Immortal Palace. Seeing that the restriction on the jade bottle had become thin in a moment, if they didn't make a move, the jade bottle might be destroyed by the lightning of the battle between Confucianism and Taoism. Xiao Hua had to remind them. Hurry up! Okay. Zhang Daoran and the others only woke up at this time as if they had just woken up from a dream. They each urged their magic treasures to hit the restriction under the lightning. Boom! In a flash of brilliance, the 3 magic treasures hit the restriction with lightning speed. Whoosh! But just as the brilliance was born, Xiaohua waved his sleeve and used the heaven and earth sleeve technique more skillfully than anyone else. He forcibly grabbed the jade bottle in the restriction that had just cracked a little. However, before Master Sun Kong could frown, Xiaohua's hand flashed in front of Fu Jiwen's eyes like a dragonfly skimming the water. The jade bottle instantly fell into Fu Jiwen's hand before Fu Jiwen realized it. Even if Master Sun Kong wanted to say something, he was afraid that he couldn't. After all, Xiaohua and Fu Jiwen were master and disciple. Although Xiaohua himself said that he wouldn't snatch the jade bottle, it was reasonable for him to snatch it for Fu Jiwen. Especially, with Fu Jiwen's cultivation, he couldn't use these elixirs at all. Senior Xiao! At this time, Gong Shui Xian hurriedly called out. Hurry up and put the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal on another restriction. Unfortunately, Xiaohua rolled his eyes at her and said lightly. If you have the ability, take it yourself. You! Gong Shui Xian was a little breathless with anger. Looking at the lightning above the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal, she also realized that this was the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal. The thunder of Heaven Punishment represented the wrath of heaven. How could an ordinary cultivator trigger it? But thinking of this, Gong Shui Xian couldn't help but look at Fu Jiwen again. Yes, this kind of lightning punishment, why wasn't Fu Jiwen afraid? Seeing Xiaohua take the jade bottle so easily and she didn't even have the thought of making a move, Fairy Xiangfeng was really ashamed and angry. She couldn't help glaring at Immortal Diquan, whose eyes had already fallen to the ground. When Immortal Diquan noticed Fairy Xiangfeng's gaze, he unconsciously swallowed the saliva that almost flowed out. He looked at Immortal Han and Yi Mingzi with a bitter smile. He really regretted that he didn't agree with Zhang Daren's suggestion. -13. Chapter 3740. Fu Jiwen, quickly let me see what kind of elixir is inside. Gusuchiodi smiled and stretched out her hand. Yes, senior. Fu Jiwen obediently raised his hand and the jade bottle flew into Gusuchiodi's hand. His gaze still fell on the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal. Although the thunderbolts on the restriction had already subsided and the lightning on the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal was now extremely weak due to breaking the restriction, Fu Jiwen's heart still clenched when he thought about how he didn't use the thunder-amplifying wood to block the lightning today. Damn it, why did I take in such a stupid disciple? Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry and scolded. What are you looking at? Wasn't the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal the same when I didn't give you the thunder-amplifying wood? Today, the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal has been worn down by the restriction lightning and doesn't have much power anymore. Don't worry. Yes, master. Fu Jiwen was a little absent-minded and answered, but his gaze didn't move away from the lightning. Brother Daoran, come and take a look. The jade bottle in Gusuchiodi's hand had already fallen into Jai Xingzi's hand. After seeing it, Jai Xingzi's face flushed red. He didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly beckoned Zhang Daoran over. How could Zhang Daoran not know the rarity of the elixir in the jade bottle? Looking at the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal that no longer had any lightning, he chuckled and didn't rush over. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal in his hand. His figure landed beside Fu Jiwen and placed the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal in the thunder-amplifying wood. He then said to Taoist Master Diquan, Taoist Master Diquan, according to our agreement, it's time for you to take action. After the 4 of you take action, if you succeed, we'll immediately enter the final maze. If you fail, hee. After saying that, Zhang Daoran used his hand to pull Fu Jiwen and said to Jai Xingzi and the others, Let's go over there and talk. Immediately after, Zhang Daoran and the others walked away with their heads held high. The 7 of them gathered in a corner of the cave. After Zhang Daoran set up a restriction, they hid inside to discuss how to split the teams. Although Xue Ping and the others were a little jealous in their hearts, their jealousy varied from person to person. For example, Xue Ping immediately realized that Xiaohua accepting Fu Jiwen as his disciple was not as simple as he had thought. When he thought about his encounter inside the stone wall, he had long since calmed down. Looking at the strange expressions on the faces of the people around him, he sighed in his heart and closed his eyes to comprehend. Taoist Master Di Quan and the others didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Of the 4 nascent soul cultivators, 2 were injured, and 2 had suffered under the restriction. How could they still have the strength to break the restriction? Although Zhang Dairen's words weren't sarcastic, there was a hint of mockery. However, the 4 of them exchanged glances. Their minds were already spinning as they pondered on how to break the seal. However, Fu Jiwen relied on the heavenly punishment prison crystal to break the restriction. This method couldn't be used casually. The 4 of them racked their brains but couldn't find a way to resist the restriction of a tribulation-passing cultivator. Half an hour later, Zhang Daoren removed the restriction. Everyone, including Gong Shui Xian, had a smile on their faces. Taoist Master Di Quan and the others felt even more bitter in their hearts. Obviously, a bottle of panacea refined by a tribulation-passing cultivator had been cleanly divided up by these shameful opponents. If they couldn't come up with something to break the restriction, they would lose the qualification to break the restriction. Of course, when Zhang Daoren and Taoist Master Di Quan discussed before, they didn't mention the time to break the restriction. However, Taoist Master Di Quan didn't think that the 4 of them had any qualifications to delay the time. Sure enough, without waiting for Zhang Daoren to speak, Sun Kong looked at the restriction on the jade table that hadn't moved in the slightest and said with a smile, "It seems that the 4 fellow Taoists are very polite. You had to wait for us to be present before breaking the restriction. In that case, I asked the 4 fellow Taoists to make a move. We've already discussed and prepared to wait for the 4 fellow Taoists to try before getting the last spirit channeling magic treasure." Spirit channeling magic treasure? Xiaohua nodded slightly. He knew that on the hidden Immortal continent, spirit channeling magic treasures were spirit tools. Hearing Sun Kong's confident tone, Taoist Master Di Quan looked at Taoist Master Han and the others and asked helplessly, "What do you 3 fellow Taoists think?" This Taoist Master Han wasn't as depressed as Taoist Master Di Quan. He had been looking at the jade table with narrowed eyes and seemed to be thinking about something. Now that he heard Taoist Master Di Quan's question, he hesitated slightly and said, "Fellow Taoist Sun Kong, can you give us a bit more time?" "Hee, why not?" Sun Kong waved his sleeve and laughed loudly. "Then I'll give the 4 fellow Taoists 20 hours. After 20 hours, we'll make a move." "Many thanks, fellow Taoist." Taoist Master Han cupped his hands and replied. At this time, not to mention Taoist Master Han, even Xue Ping and the others knew that Fu Jiwen's heavenly punishment prison crystal would definitely produce heavenly punishment lightning again after 24 hours. Taoist Master Han. Seeing Taoist Master Han take the initiative to speak, Taoist Master Di Quan's eyes lit up and he asked tentatively, "You?" Taoist Master Han nodded slightly and took out a few formation plates. He formed hand seals and the formation plates landed on both sides of the jade table. The formation plates flickered with obscure fluctuations and enveloped the entire jade table in a moment. Then Taoist Master Han took out a few formation flags and rubbed them with his hands. Strands of strange brilliance fell into the formation flags. These formation flags floated and landed in the void above the jade table. When everything was ready, Taoist Master Han smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists, please come with me. I just saw Taoist Master Xiao break the formation. I have some insights." "Okay." Taoist Master Di Quan and the others were delighted. Only Fairy Xiangfeng was a bit hesitant, but she still flew with the 3. When Taoist Master Han set up a silent barrier, the 4 began to discuss. "Hee, Lady Gong Shu." Xiaohua looked at the formation set up by Taoist Master Han and said with a smile, "How confident do you think Taoist Master Han is in breaking the restriction?" Gong Shui Xian rolled her eyes at Xiaohua and said coldly, "I should be the one asking Senior Xiao this question, right?" Taoist Master Han is your Tao sect cultivator. You should know better than me. I can't see it either. But it seems they came prepared. Xiaohua touched his nose and completely erased the doubt in his heart. He shook his head and said, Perhaps this Taoist Master Han is the instigator of entering the Cloud Mountain Maze formation. Yes, this Taoist Master Han knows formations. Moreover, his magic treasure is a wood attribute flying sword. Presumably, he has already thought of a way to restrain the restriction lightning. This Taoist Master Han is amazing. Gusuchiodi nodded and said. However, Zhang Daoran and Sun Kong were Zhai Xingzi. The three people's eyes revealed doubt. Sun Kong asked curiously, Brother Daoran, have you heard of this Taoist Master Han's name? No. Zhang Daoran replied flatly. I haven't even heard of that Yun Mengzi. It's really strange. A jade pavilion gathering actually involves so many nascent soul cultivators of my hidden immortal continent. It's really out of my expectations. Zhai Xingzi was also stunned. He even looked at Xiaohua. Let's not talk about others. With Taoist Master Zhao's cultivation, although I'm not close to your province, I haven't heard of any rumors. Am I a bit ignorant? Seeing everyone talking about his background again, Xiaohua hurriedly waved his hand and said with a very mysterious smile, I'm not surnamed Gusu. Why do you know me? Besides, don't ask about a hero's origin. Miracles are naturally man-made. There are so many nameless great experts in this world. Who knows where a divine clone is hiding? Different. Zhang Daoran shook his head. Hidden immortal continent of Confucian cultivators, how can there be too many miracles? What about Grand Mist Ancestor? Xiaohua hit the nail on the head. When these words came out, everyone was speechless. Their faces were filled with envy and reverence. Clearly, this Grand Mist Ancestor had long been a legend of the hidden immortal continent. Not long after, Taoist Master Han and the others had finished their discussion. Taoist Master Di Quan and Yimingzi's faces were filled with excitement. On the other hand, Fairy Xiangfeng was biting her lips with a helpless expression. Fellow Taoists, this time I am the abbot of breaking the seal. According to our previous discussion, I ask that you all do your best. Taoist Master Han and the others sat in front of the jade table as before. Taoist Master Han raised his hand and cupped his hands towards the three of them. All right, we will listen to Taoist Master Han's instructions. Yimingzi was the first to answer. Taoist Master Di Quan and Fairy Xiangfeng did not speak. They only nodded slightly. Seeing this, Taoist Master Han raised his hand and took out a fist-sized bead from his Taoist robe. Thunder-devouring bead! Xiaohua raised his eyebrows and was secretly shocked. The thunder-devouring bead in Taoist Master Han's hand was very similar to the thunder-devouring bead that Xiaohua had brought back to the thunder-controlling sect from the Dawn Rain continent. However, the thunder-devouring bead in Taoist Master Han's hand was clearly a bit shabby. Although there were some threads of lightning inside, they could not cause the lightning to change. In particular, the outer layer of the thunder-devouring bead actually had traces of golden lines, and on top of these lines, there were many strange lightning runes that were as thin as ants. These lightning runes floated along with the light, and their shape was also like a horned dragon. Damn it, what is the background of this Taoist Master Han? He actually has a thunder-devouring bead in his hand? However, it seems like this thunder-devouring bead is not his life magic treasure. I don't think it's that important. Xiaohua sighed and immediately understood what Taoist Master Han was thinking. Fellow Taoists, please prepare. Taoist Master Han raised the thunder-devouring bead, swept his gaze across the crowd and said in a low voice. At this time, Xiaohua suddenly opened his mouth and said, Taoist Master Han, I have a suggestion. Oh? Taoist Master Xiao, please speak. Taoist Master Han was slightly startled as he said in surprise. Xiaohua laughed. Taoist Master Han, how confident are you? 30%. Taoist Master Han replied without hesitation. So it's like that. Seeing that Taoist Master Han did not hide anything, Xiaohua nodded and said, Since Taoist Master Han is only 30% confident, and after 20 hours, we are 100% confident. In order to save time, I have a suggestion. If Taoist Master Han feels that he is about to fail this time, can you remind me? Or if I feel that Taoist Master Han has reached a critical moment where he is about to fail, I can help. I only need 40%. -13. Chapter 37:41. This? Shinran Han really didn't expect Xiao Hua to have such a suggestion. Even Master Sun Kong and Zhang Daoran were somewhat stunned. Shinran Zhao's words. Can you speak for the other fellow Taoists? Shinran Han thought for a moment, and whispered to Shinran Di Quan and the others. While they were discussing, Xiao Hua also transmitted his voice to Zhang Daoran and the others, telling them about his sudden decision. Zhang Daoran and the others had already obtained spirit pills, and they were all half a step into the out-of-body realm. That life source magic treasure was very important. It was a communication channel between the main body and the nascent soul. They couldn't give up their life source magic treasure, even for a spirit weapon. In particular, there was only one spirit weapon on the jade table. It was not easy to take it out, so they all agreed with Xiao Hua's suggestion. Hearing that Zhang Daoran and the others didn't object, Shinran Han naturally didn't have any objections. If Xiao Hua made a move, they would have a 60% chance of success. If Xiao Hua didn't make a move, they would only have a 30% chance of success. In fact, at this time, Shinran Han and the others didn't understand that this was Xiao Hua's earliest suggestion. After the discussion, Taoist Master Di Quan and the others released their yuaning. Taoist Han rubbed his hands. What fell from his hands was not light, but thunder threads. The thunder threads turned into a lightning net and landed on the thunder-devouring bead. The entire thunder-devouring bead rumbled. Thunderbolts were produced from the thunder-devouring bead. The entire thunder-devouring bead was like a small horned dragon that pounced on the restriction. Boom, boom, boom! The scene that everyone was familiar with appeared once again. The lightning above the restriction also surged towards the thunder amplification tree. Different types of lightning collided with each other, and one by one, they were annihilated in the void. Seeing the lightning above the restriction weakening, Shinran Han shouted, "Fellow Taoists, please make a move!" As soon as his voice fell, Shinran Di Quan and the others urged their life source magic treasure to attack the restriction. However, to Xiao Hua's surprise, Fairy Xiangfeng's magic treasure was changed to a bell. There were 2 bells, and as he waved them, 2 beams of light, one green and one red, intertwined and rushed into the restriction. Crackle, crackle! The 4 magical treasures hit the seal, especially Fairy Xiangfeng's green and red brilliance. Although it couldn't be compared to Xiao Hua's spirit-punishing vital light, it was still very sharp. The entire seal shook violently and let out extremely powerful thunderclaps. Boom! Amidst the thunderclap, 30% of the lightning threads sent the magic treasures of the 4 nascent soul cultivators flying, and the remaining 70% of the lightning threads landed on the thunder-devouring bead. The thunder-devouring bead shone brightly, and there was a faint sound of a dragon's roar. Following that there was a crisp pa-pa-pa sound, and the surface of the originally worn-out thunder-devouring bead actually began to crack. After half of the 7 layers of lightning threads were absorbed by the thunder-devouring bead, the cracks on the thunder-devouring bead grew even larger, and the other half of the lightning threads bared their fangs and brandished their claws as they pounced towards the magic treasures of Taoist Han and the others. Not good! Perfected Han controlled the thunder-devouring bead and immediately sensed that something was wrong. He hurriedly shouted, "My magic treasure can't hold on any longer. Fellow Taoists, be careful." As he spoke, Perfected Han was the first to withdraw and fly back dozens of feet. Taoist Master Di Quan and the others had long since suffered from the restriction, and they were like birds startled by the twang of a bow as they hastily retreated. Xiao is going to make a move. Seeing this, Xiao Hua reminded them, and a golden light flew out from his Taoist robe. Shua! Almost faster than the lightning, the Tang Jiao cut through the loosened restriction below the thunder-devouring bead. At the same time, the restriction was torn open, and there was a loud rumble. The Tingjiao shears were also hit by layers of lightning and tumbled in the air. Ah? What's going on? Gong Shuisin stared intently at the spirit weapon inside the restriction. But after the golden light flashed, the spirit weapon suddenly disappeared. She exclaimed in disbelief and looked up at Xiaohua. She really didn't understand how Xiaohua had taken the spirit weapon away from the restriction that was only a sliver torn. Looking at Xiaohua again, his figure slightly swayed in the air, and his face suddenly turned pale. Granny, Sung Lungzi's restriction is really powerful. Xiaohua used his mind to take the item, and in just a moment, he was still injured by the lightning. Xiaohua understood his own difficulties and bitterly smiled in his heart. As soon as the spirit tool fell into Xiaohua's space, the restriction on the jade table immediately disappeared, and the lightning completely disappeared. When Xiaohua put away the Tingjiao shears, only the damaged thunder-devouring bead was left floating in the air. Alas, I lost the treasure, but it's still like drawing water with a bamboo basket. Taoist Master Han sighed and waved his hand, and the thunder-devouring bead was about to fly up. At this moment, Xiaohua waved his big sleeve and cut off Taoist Master Han's magic power. Smiling, he took out the spirit tool and said with a smile, Taoist Master Han, I'll make a deal with you. Oh? Taoist Master Han saw Xiaohua stop him from collecting the thunder-devouring bead and was slightly surprised. Looking at the thunder-devouring bead and then at the spirit tool, he suddenly realized. Taoist Master Xiao, you've taken a fancy to my thunder-devouring bead? That's right, Xiaohua said with a smile. I've taken a fancy to your complete thunder-devouring bead. Unfortunately, the thunder-devouring bead is damaged and can't match up to 40% of the spirit tool's value. I'm in a bit of a difficult position. Taoist Master Han didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Xiaohua's words were clearly bargaining. If Xiaohua was in a difficult position, why did he stop him from collecting the thunder-devouring bead? He was clearly afraid that he wouldn't agree to the deal. It was obvious that he was trying to blackmail him. However, looking at Xiaohua's smiling face, Taoist Master Han felt a little distressed. Xiaohua's attitude could be considered amiable. If he was in a different situation, with such a great disparity in strength, what he did would be far more excessive than Xiaohua. Thinking for a moment, Taoist Master Han waved his hand and removed the magic power controlling the thunder-devouring bead. He said with a smile, This thunder-devouring bead was obtained by me through life and death. It's very important to me. Although it's already damaged, I'm not willing to give it up. Everyone in the cave mansion was well aware that this sentence was also a bargaining. However, Xiaohua didn't mind. After all, the thunder-devouring bead was in his hands and the spirit tool was also in his hands. Although he first controlled the thunder-devouring bead to reveal his true thoughts, this was both passive and active. It was better than forcing the thunder-devouring bead into Taoist Master Han's hands. Forget it. Since Taoist Master Han also values the thunder-devouring bead so much, this thunder-devouring bead should be worth 40% of the spirit tool's value. Xiaohua took a step back and said with a smile, I'll use 40% of the spirit tool to exchange for this thunder-devouring bead. Straightforward. Taoist Master Han was as surprised as everyone else. They couldn't think of why this damaged thunder-devouring bead was so important to Xiaohua. Xiaohua would rather give up the spirit tool to obtain this thunder-devouring bead. However, Taoist Master Han was also a decisive person. After thinking for a moment, he nodded in agreement. Xiaohua laughed mischievously. With a wave of his sleeve, the thunder-devouring bead fell into the space. Once again, the space was filled with lightning and strange phenomena. Xiaohua once again raised his hand, and the flute-like spirit artifact flew towards Taoist Master Han. He said, I will give 40% to Taoist Master Han. Taoist Master Han now has 55% of this psychic treasure. Hee, I'll take 60%. Taoist Master Han was in a good mood. He smiled and prepared to accept the spirit tool. However, right at this moment, the spirit artifact let out a sharp sound that pierced straight into everyone's ears. The spirit artifact suddenly shook and actually escaped from Taoist Han's hands. It drew an arc in the air and rushed into one of the holes. Still want to escape? Xiaohua's Naiwen palace flashed with golden light and blocked the spirit tool's attack. Then, he sneered and used the heaven and earth sleeve technique to control the spirit tool in an instant. Then, he took out a talisman from his Taoist robe and stuck it on the spirit tool under the urging of his magic power. The spirit tool's undulations immediately disappeared and it obediently lay in Xiaohua's hand. Fellow Taoist Han, keep it well! Xiaohua smiled and threw the spirit tool into Taoist Master Han's hand. Taoist Master Han's face was a bit red. He couldn't keep his face. Xiaohua didn't care about the spirit tool, but someone did. Old Senior Xiao. Seeing the spirit tool's power, Gong Shui Xin hurriedly said, Old Senior Xiao, this is a Taoist spirit tool. How can you easily give it to others? But after Gong Shui Xin finished speaking, no one echoed her. Gong Shui Xin looked around and saw Gusuchiodi and the others looking at her like she was an idiot. In an instant, the greed that had just arisen subsided and her face flushed red. Wasn't she a Confucian cultivator? What did she want this spirit tool for? Even Master Sun Kong didn't say anything. How could she open her mouth? Besides, she didn't say anything earlier. Now that she saw the spirit tool's power, what was the point of bringing it up again? Taoist Master Han put away the spirit tool and brought Taoist Master Di Quan and the others to a corner to set up a restriction. After a while, the four flew back with smiles on their faces. Obviously, they each gained something. As for whose hands the spirit tool fell into, Xiaohua didn't care and didn't ask. Zhang Daoran looked at the cave abode that looked like it had been washed by water, and then looked at the 4 different cave entrances. He smiled and said, The matter here is over, and we have no other way out. It seems that we can only break through the last maze. Fellow Taoists, what do you plan to do? Master Sun Kong glanced at Taoist Master Han and the others and asked indifferently. Fellow Taoist Han and the others also want to attack the formation with us? Taoist Master Han said with a smile. I also don't want to follow behind you, but there's no other way. Although Master Sun Kong didn't care about the spirit tool, he didn't want it to fall into the hands of others. This was what ordinary cultivators thought, so he asked Taoist Master Han. Zhang Daoran shook his head and looked at the 4 holes. He said, For more passages, just like before. According to our experience in the previous maze, the most dangerous part of this maze is the protection outside. This maze seems to be where Senior Tsang Longzi tests our strength. Therefore, I think it's better to split up. What do you think, Taoist Master Xiao? Of course, Xiaohua said with a smile. If we stay together, we'll have fewer opportunities. I agree to split up. In that case, I'll take this passage. Seeing that Xiaohua didn't object, Zhang Daoran raised his hand and pointed at a jellyfish-like hole. I want to travel with Brother Daoran. What do you think? Just as Zhang Daoran finished speaking, Taoist Master Han hurriedly spoke and cupped his hands towards Zhang Daoran. -13. Chapter 3742. Zhang Daoran looked at Taoist Han, then looked at the strange faces of Taoist Di Quan and the others. He nodded slightly and said, Of course. I'll lead the way. Brother Daoran will bring up the rear. Taoist Han saw that Zhang Daoran agreed and flew into the cave without saying a word. Ha ha ha, why is Taoist Han more anxious than this old man? Zhang Daoran laughed and waved his hand. Disciples, hurry up and enter the cave. Yes. Zhang Daoran and the other disciples agreed in unison and flew into the cave with the few low-level disciples. Just as Zhang Daoran was about to fly into the cave, Xiaohua seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He suddenly flew in front of the jade table and waved his sleeve. The jade table was taken into his space. Then Xiaohua let out a long breath. He clapped his hands and looked around. He smiled and said, Phew! I finally remembered. I always felt that something was missing. It turns out that I didn't take this jade table away. Faint. Zhang Daoran looked at Xiaohua's stingy appearance and almost laughed out loud. He said loudly, Brother Xiao, let's meet again in the cave. Okay, I'll wait for Brother Daoran inside. Xiaohua replied with a smile. As soon as these words came out, Zhang Daoran's figure in midair dropped slightly by half a foot. This was simply more powerful than any spell. Since Taoist Han mentioned that he would follow Zhang Daoran, Taoist Di Quan and Yi Mingzi didn't stand on ceremony. They followed Zhai Xingzi and Sun Kong Shangren into the cave. Taoist Di Quan and Yi Mingzi wanted to walk together, but seeing Sun Kong Shangren's vigilance, the two consciously separated. Taoist Xiao. Fairy Xiang Feng saw that everyone had left and asked with a smile, Can I follow Taoist into the last maze? Of course. Xiaohua looked at the last remaining somewhat fat cave. The strange beast's shape was like a turtle and also like a big bear. He nodded slightly. Dao Qing had already said that he knew Taoist Di Quan, but Dao Qing had already left in advance. At this time, Fairy Xiang Feng was alone. Like Taoist Han, she cupped her hands at Xiaohua and said, Since that's the case, I will also lead the way. With that, Fairy Xiang Feng flew into the cave. Xiaohua turned his head and shouted, Fu Jiwen. However, just as he finished speaking, Xiaohua was somewhat stunned. He hurriedly turned his head to look at the pitch-black cave entrance. He sniffed and said very strangely, Strange, why is there a fragrance on Yun Mengzi's body? Senior. Upon hearing Xiaohua's call, Fu Jiwen and Xue Ping flew over. Fu Jiwen asked, Shall we go in as well? Fu Jiwen, do you think this? Forget it, let's not talk about this for now. Xiaohua wanted to say something but hesitated. He looked at Xue Ping and the rest and asked, There's no one else here. Let me ask you, are you following behind me? Or enter this old man's nation weapon? Junior is willing to enter the nation treasure. A cultivator with serious injuries spoke up. Xue Ping and the others hesitated for a moment before entering as well. Without another word, Xiaohua put them into the Kunlun ruins and flew into the cave with Fu Jiwen. After waiting for Xiaohua and the others to enter the cave, a few moments later, cloud patterns once again appeared on the stone wall where Xiaohua and the others had appeared. The Confucian cultivator who was at the 5th level of origin energy from before flew out with a flushed face. As soon as the Confucian cultivator with thick eyebrows appeared, clouds surged around him again. However, when he saw the unusually clean cave abode and the 4 open tunnels, he immediately understood what had happened. This old man has truly underestimated these Dao sect cultivators. I even underestimated Sang Longzi. My trip to the Cloud Mountain maze today was worth it. After saying that, the Confucian cultivator hurriedly stood there. The flying inscriptions carried an awe-inspiring aura and formed a cauldron-shaped cocoon around him. The inscriptions that had condensed into crystal threads did not dissipate for a long time. However, it was only a moment before the Confucian cultivator opened his eyes reluctantly. He looked at the pitch-black tunnel and sighed. Sigh, what a pity! I still have to catch up. Otherwise, if Xiaohua leaves the cave abode, it'll be a little troublesome. After saying that, the Confucian cultivator pondered for a moment and flew into a tunnel. An hour after the Confucian cultivator disappeared, 3 Confucian cultivators wearing bright yellow robes also appeared. The 3 of them were even more decisive than the Confucian cultivator with the thick eyebrows. They didn't stop at all. The 3 of them didn't separate and rushed into a passage. The second layer of the maze was different from the previous ones. The cave was obviously much larger, and there was light coming from an unknown source. In particular, the restriction on divine sense was much stronger. Even someone as strong as Xiaohua could only extend his divine sense to a range of a few dozen meters, unable to extend it any further. At this time, Xiaohua had already caught up with Fairy Xiang Feng. Fairy Xiang Feng's so-called scouting ahead was just a polite attitude. If Xiaohua did not bring Fu Jiwen, he could let Fairy Xiang Feng fly in front. However, with Fu Jiwen, Xiaohua could only let Fu Jiwen take the heart-stabilizing plate and lead the way. Of course, Fairy Xiang Feng did not dare to not do anything. In this second layer of the maze, she had already blocked many attacks for Fujiwen, and had even used her life source magic weapon several times. Alright, Taoist Yun Meng! Seeing Fairy Xiangfeng working so hard, Xiaohua felt a bit embarrassed and said with a smile, "You rest for a moment. Next, Fujiwen and I will lead the way. Then I will have to trouble Taoist Xiao." Fairy Xiangfeng was truly exhausted. Her cheekbones flashed with a strange light. Xiaohua waved his hand and took out a pill from the space. He handed it to Fairy Xiangfeng and said with a smile, "This is a pill refined by Xiaohua. It can replenish quintessential essence. Why don't you try it?" Fairy Xiangfeng smiled and took the pill. However, she did not consume it and replied, "I am just a bit exhausted. I will be fine after resting for a while." And Xiaohua's expression did not change. He slapped his hand and the seal of overturning sea flew above Fujiwen's head to protect him. "Taoist Xiao." Fairy Xiangfeng looked around and asked curiously, "Where are Shui Ping and the others? Did they stay in the cave?" "No," Xiaohua replied without turning his head. "Xiaohua has a country weapon. I will temporarily keep them inside and let them out after we get the cave." "Oh?" Fairy Xiangfeng was slightly surprised. She rolled her eyes and said, "Taoist Xiao is very protective of your disciples. Shui Ping and the others are not Xiaohua's disciples." Xiaohua corrected. "Xiaohua only met him once." "Since you only met him once," Fairy Xiangfeng asked in confusion, "Taoist Xiao believes Shui Ping's words? You dared to bring him into the Misty Mountain maze?" "Yes." Xiaohua nodded. "Aren't we in the Misty Mountain maze now? His words are not wrong." "That is not what I meant," Fairy Xiangfeng hurriedly explained. "What I mean is that Taoist Xiao is already able to bring them in. Moreover, in the cave from before, I saw that these low-level disciples had already found some useful treasures. In particular, when they passed through the stone wall, they obtained a lot. Taoist Xiao does not need to bring these burdens. Taoist Xiao means to leave them in the cave from before? That is not it. Sigh, I don't know what to say." Fairy Xiangfeng was at a loss for words. She was purely trying to dispel Xiaohua's conflict and increase his favorable impression of her. "I just feel that Taoist Xiao is doing too much for these strangers. Perhaps." Xiaohua activated the seal of overturning ocean, and a ferocious earthen yellow radiance rushed past Fujiwen, sweeping away all the huge rocks that were smashing towards him. He replied somewhat absent-mindedly, "They are still my Tao sect's disciples after all. I also want to give them some benefits. Taoist Xiao is so kind." Fairy Xiangfeng sneered in her heart. However, her tone did not change. She then asked, "Oh, right. I was invited by Taoist Diquan. However, I heard from Dao Qing that Taoist Xiao had just returned from the Yaotai gathering. Could it be that Taoist Xiao did not kill my Tao sect disciples on the Yaotai mountain? Of course I have killed Tao sect disciples. However, I have killed more Confucian sect disciples." Xiaohua did not seem to notice. He still had his back facing Fairy Xiangfeng as he said, "Moreover, I have killed many Tao sect disciples. However, I have saved many more." "I don't believe it." Fairy Xiangfeng laughed. "That year, I participated in the Yaotai gathering and killed many people. There were many Tao sect disciples inside. It is up to you whether you believe it or not." Xiaohua turned around. His eyes were very clear. "I have no regrets." "Humph, no regrets." Fairy Xiangfeng cursed inwardly. After passing through the maze, she did not see Fairy Su Ming and did not hear Jai Xingzi and the others mention her. How could Fairy Xiangfeng not know that Fairy Su Ming had died in Xiaohua's hands? "I heard that this Yaotai gathering was different from before. Not only did golden core cultivators die inside, even nascent soul cultivators were almost wiped out." Fairy Xiangfeng asked again. Xiaohua nodded. "Indeed. Why? How would I know?" Xiaohua shook his head. "I was also seriously injured inside. I was lucky to escape and do not know the details." Of course, if Taoist Yumeng wants to know who I have killed, I can tell you the reason. Don't. Fairy Xiang Feng hurriedly waved her hand. Taoist Xiao, you are preparing to kill me. I don't want to hear this. It doesn't matter. Xiaohua laughed. If I don't mention names, how would you know? I have endured for a long time. If I don't tell anyone, I will feel uncomfortable. Very well. Fairy Xiang Feng laughed bitterly. I can only believe in Taoist Zhao's character. Then Xiaohua explained in detail why he killed Taoist Xiang Tian and Taoist Chu Feng. Fairy Xiang Feng's expression changed several times. In the end, she sighed slightly and said, Taoist Xiao, you killed them well. One of them bullied the weak and forced people to buy and sell. In the end, he even harmed the innocent. The other one was even more sinister. He wanted to take advantage of your injuries to steal your Qianquan bag. He indeed deserved to be killed. -13. Chapter 3743. If fellow Taoist Elmar thinks so, then that's great, Xiaohua said with a smile. I've always convinced people with virtue. Now that you and I are going to break through the maze of Misty Mountain, we should trust each other. Taoist Xiao, don't worry. Fairy Xiang Feng nodded. I have absolute trust in Taoist Xiao. Oh, right. Xiaohua suddenly asked. Does fellow Taoist Elmar know Fairy Su Ming? Of course. Fairy Xiang Feng blinked her eyes and said curiously. Ji Prefecture's Fairy Su Ming is a late nascent soul stage cultivator. How could I not know? At this point, Fairy Xiang Feng rolled her eyes and said with a smile. Could it be that Taoist Xiao has something to say directly to Fairy Su Ming? Or does Taoist Xiao have other ideas? Oh, according to what I know, although Fairy Su Ming has never dual cultivated, she still has dual cultivated Taoist Xiao. Without waiting for Fairy Xiang Feng to finish speaking, Xiaohua hurriedly waved his hand to stop her. He rolled his eyes at her and said, No matter how useless I am, I won't find such an arrogant female cultivator as my dual cultivation partner. I'm just joking with Taoist Xiao. Why is Taoist Xiao looking for Fairy Su Ming? Fairy Xiang Feng asked. Nothing much. Xiaohua's face sank. In the future, whether it's Ji Prefecture or hidden Immortal Continent, there won't be a cultivator called Fairy Su Ming. Oh? Why? Fairy Xiang Feng was surprised, but suddenly she seemed to have thought of something. She hurriedly stopped in midair and asked in a low voice. What does Taoist Xiao mean? I've only met Fairy Su Ming once. I don't care about the grudges between you and Fairy Su Ming. Why is Taoist Xiao talking to me about this? Taoist Elmar doesn't need to worry, Xiaohua said with a smile. I just want to tell Taoist Xiao that the cultivator who forced her to buy and sell was Taoist Chu Feng. Fairy Su Ming wanted to take revenge for Taoist Chu Feng and wanted to besiege me with other cultivators in the first maze, but I killed her. Sigh. Fairy Xiangfeng took a deep breath and sighed. Damn Fairy Su Ming! That Taoist Master Chu used her name to commit a lot of evil deeds, but these evil deeds were nothing more than gossip in Fairy Su Ming's ears. Now that she was dead, it was her retribution. In fact, there is really no need for Taoist Master Xiao to mention this to me. Xiaohua stared at Fairy Xiang Feng and asked word by word. Oh, this Xiao wants to know if fellow Taoists saw Fairy Su Ming when you entered the Misty Mountain Maze formation. Fairy Xiang Feng didn't avoid his gaze. Instead, she calmly replied, This old man can swear a blood oath that this old man didn't see Fairy Su Ming and the others outside the Misty Mountain Maze. Hearing Fairy Xiangfeng's words, Xiaohua's expression relaxed. He smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Elmar, there's no need to be so serious. I was just asking. It was also at this time that a rumbling sound came from afar. It was as if the entire secret passage had collapsed. An earth-shattering cloud of dust mixed with gravel rushed towards Xiaohua and the others. Seeing this, Fairy Xiang Feng hurriedly waved her hand. A jade bracelet like magic treasure flew out. At the same time, she shouted, Taoist Master Xiao, be careful. This old man just happens to have a bracelet that repels dust. Okay. Xiaohua didn't have time to care about whether Fairy Xiangfeng had sworn a blood oath or not. He agreed and stepped aside, watching the jade bracelet fly in front of his head. The jade bracelet emitted an earthy yellow brilliance. That brilliance was like a long cover. Not only did it cover Fujiwen and himself, it also produced a strange fluctuation in front of his head. It separated the dust and gravel that were rushing over to both sides. However, the strength of the gravel in the secret passage was extremely great. The brilliance of the jade bracelet trembled rapidly like a candle in the wind. Taoist Master Xiao! Fairy Xiangfeng softly reprimanded and called out. This is the restriction of the secret passage. It seems to be quite powerful. We must work harder to break through. The longer we stay in this restriction, the more dangerous it will be. This old man will lead the way. Okay. I'll have to trouble you, fellow Taoist. Xiaohua looked at Fairy Xiangfeng's vigorous figure flying in front of him. A thoughtful expression appeared on his face. Sure enough, the restrictive spells in the second layer of the formation were far stronger than those in the first layer. Fairy Xiangfeng would not care about the dust and pebbles that were pouring into the tunnel like a flood if she were anywhere else. However, as she kept moving forward, she found it harder and harder to keep going. This was because not only did she have to find the direction in this secret passage, she also had to maintain the magic power of her magic treasure. Especially as she went deeper into the secret passage, Fairy Xiangfeng found that her magic power was getting more and more exhausted. Moreover, the heaven-earth yuan qi in the secret passage was getting thinner and thinner. The magic power consumed by yuaning was much more than usual. Taoist Master Xiao! After flying like this for an hour, there was still no end in sight. Fairy Xiangfeng could only open her mouth and say, This secret passage is strange. This old man's magic power is actually not enough. This old man reckons that I can still hold on for the time of a meal. After that, I will let Taoist Master Xiao lead the way. And this Xiao has already sensed it. Xiaohua's face also became serious. He said, This maze is actually starting to restrict my Taoist magic power. At the same time, it is also gradually isolating the heaven-earth yuan qi. I fear that there will be big trouble ahead. Humph! Fairy Xiangfeng snorted coldly. She took out a pill from her bosom and put it into her mouth. She said very heroically, This old man wants to see how powerful this maze is. As she spoke, Fairy Xiangfeng once again activated her magic power. The jade bracelet shone brightly. Like a bamboo umbrella swaying in a storm, it rushed into the distance. Fujiwen! Xiaohua looked into the distance and ordered, You can hide in here. Yes, master! Fujiwen hurriedly kept the heart-calming plate. Xiaohua took out the Kunlun mirror and kept Fujiwen. Then, Xiaohua pointed at the seal of the ocean and shouted, Taoist Yumeng, this Xiao will help you! Wang Wang! The coiling dragon roared. The seal rumbled. An earthen yellow light that was much more vast than the jade bracelet shot out from the seal of the ocean and chased after it like a flood dragon. Thank you, Taoist Xiao! Fairy Xiangfeng looked at the power of Xiaohua's seal of the ocean, and her heart sank. However, there was no change in her expression. She only smiled and nodded. She retreated slightly and made space for Xiaohua. Just like that, they flew for another 2 hours. Seeing that the secret tunnel was even wider and the qi of heaven and earth was almost gone, Xiaohua and Fairy Xiangfeng's true essence was suppressed by the restriction in the secret tunnel, and could not flow. Their nascent souls were also tightly locked in their lower dantian, and could not be released even if they wanted to. Fairy Xiangfeng was still fine as she was only a nascent soul. However, Xiaohua had more than 100 nascent souls in his lower dantian. That terrifying pressure almost made him collapse. Helpless, Xiaohua could only take out the Kunlun mirror and keep all the nascent souls in the Kunlun ruins. Phew! With the nascent souls gone, the pressure suddenly decreased. Xiaohua let out a long sigh of relief. At this moment, Fairy Xiangfeng suddenly shouted in surprise, Taoist Xiao, quickly release your divine sense. Divine sense is restricted here. Oh? Xiaohua hurriedly released his divine sense. As expected, the restriction on his divine sense was long gone. His divine sense was very free in the secret tunnel. What? What is going on? Xiaohua frowned slightly. However, he felt a lot more at ease. Since his divine sense could be controlled, and his divine sense could be used, he had one more method to protect himself. Whoosh! At this moment, there was a sound like the sound of water. Xiaohua and Fairy Xiangfeng both felt their Dharma treasures break through a layer of barrier. Their bodies also became lighter. The surrounding dust and rocks and the heavy pressure disappeared. When they looked around again, it was just a misty space. Xiaohua and Fairy Xiangfeng looked at each other, their eyes were filled with shock. The two of them did not dare to put away their Dharma treasures and release their divine sense to check. It was not a big deal, but the two of them had a strange expression on their faces. Because their divine sense could not scan the edge of the space at all. Taoist Xiao, can you still use your Dharma power? Fairy Xiangfeng saw Xiaohua's expression and knew that things were not good. No! Xiaohua shook his head. However, he looked down and said, although we cannot use flying techniques or Dharma power, we are still standing in the air. Then he looked up at the seal of overturning ocean that rushed out earlier. There was no light, no Dharma power fluctuation. It was just floating in the air, as if it was placed on a table. Xiaohua walked a few steps and even jumped a few times. He reached out his hand and took the seal of overturning ocean. He weighed it in his hand and said, our Dharma treasures cannot be used either. Ouch! Saying this, Xiaohua's expression changed greatly. What is it? Taoist Xiao! Fairy Xiangfeng also picked up the jade bracelet from the air and asked hurriedly. Qiankun bag cannot be used. Xiaohua smiled bitterly. This? Fairy Xiangfeng tried a little. As expected, the jade bracelet could not be put into the Qiankun bag. Her expression changed greatly. Woo! At this moment, a gust of wind came from an unknown place. It was very cold and desolate. Fairy Xiangfeng could not help but shrink her neck. However, just as she moved, she froze in place. She hurriedly looked at Xiaohua. Fortunately, Xiaohua did not notice Fairy Xiangfeng's movement. Instead, he looked into the distance. After a moment, Xiaohua waved his hand and said, Taoist Yunmeng, follow me! Saying this, he did not wait for Fairy Xiangfeng to speak and walked towards the right. Taoist! Fairy Xiangfeng opened her mouth. She did not know where Xiaohua's confidence came from. After all, in this place, there was only light. Spiritual sense could not see the edge of this place. Even a Yuanian cultivator was no different from an ordinary blind person. However, Fairy Xiangfeng tactfully followed behind Xiaohua. However, when she saw Xiaohua's defenseless junior, her eyes flashed with a strange expression. Xiaohua did not walk in a straight line. Most of the time, he would even walk backwards. In particular, every time he changed directions, Xiaohua did not stop at all. It was as if he could see the path under his feet clearly. Xiao! Taoist Xiao! Fairy Xiangfeng could not help but say. You can see the space restriction? -13. Chapter 37:44. No! Xiaohua replied without the slightest hesitation. When Fairy Xiangfeng heard this, she almost jumped up. She even said in a low voice, Since you can't see, why are you bringing me around here? Xiaohua shrugged and replied humorously. Since Taoist's friend doesn't know where to go, why don't you follow me? Just treat it as digestion. Digestion? Fairy Xiangfeng almost fell down again. This was the Misty Mountain Maze, a maze set up by a tribulation-passing cultivator. Their lives could be in danger at any time. How could he be so casual? At this moment, Fairy Xiangfeng really wanted to slap Xiaohua's face. After walking for a while, Fairy Xiangfeng's heart began to move. Unlike the arrogant Fairy Suming, she didn't have the intention to let Xiaohua go. Although Xiaohua said so much, she didn't believe him completely. Xiaohua's character didn't have much light in her eyes. What she wanted to do was to kill Xiaohua and calmly escape. Now that they were in this mysterious space, even if she did not have any means to attack Xiaohua, as long as she could escape from this space and kill Xiaohua, wouldn't she achieve her goal? While thinking, Fairy Xiangfeng looked at Xiaohua's back and looked left and right. Then, she turned around and started to walk away. Wang wang! Just as Fairy Xiangfeng walked a few feet forward, the seemingly ordinary light in front of her immediately disappeared. Following a series of rumbling noises, leaves and pine needles flew toward her like a storm. Oh! Fairy Xiangfeng scanned with her divine sense and immediately found the difference between the leaves and pine needles. She knew that the leaves contained a strong force. She snorted and did not hesitate to raise her hand to cast a spell. Just as she raised her hand, Fairy Xiangfeng's expression changed drastically. How could she still use her dermic powers at this moment? These seemingly ordinary flying leaves and pine needles were now sharp weapons for murder. He could instantly kill her right here and now. Oh no! Fairy Xiangfeng quickly retreated, but she had miscalculated. Not only could she not cast any spells, but her movements were also somewhat slow. How could she block the continuous flying leaves? Fairy Xiangfeng knew that things were not good. She could only hope that her armor could block so many attacks. CSI. The flying leaves and pine needles seemed to have the power to tear the void apart. Fairy Xiangfeng's face turned even paler when she heard this. In the blink of an eye, Fairy Xiangfeng's spiritual sense transformed into a hand. She did not care whether it was effective or not, and grabbed at the air like a yuanying hand. Woo! Out of Fairy Xiangfeng's expectation, a nascent soul hand similar to the one she usually used appeared and grabbed all the flying leaves and pine needles in the hand, sweeping away all the miscellaneous items into space. I see! Fairy Xiangfeng immediately came to a realization. She understood why she could only use her spiritual will in this space. This space is where Senior Tsang Langzi tested the juniors of the Dao sect. What's important is the finer control of one's divine sense. Just as Fairy Xiangfeng came to a realization, Kachacha! 1,000 feet above her head, streaks of lightning appeared. Then, layers of dark clouds rolled and formed all sorts of indescribable shapes. Numerous fist-sized hailstones formed in the dark clouds and came crashing down. Good timing! Fairy Xiangfeng was filled with a heroic spirit. She performed a spell with both hands. Even though she did not use any arcane energy, it was no different from using arcane energy. One after another, cherry blossom-like lights appeared above Fairy Xiangfeng's head, protecting her firmly. Pff. Unfortunately, Fairy Xiangfeng had underestimated the power of the hailstones. The hailstones immediately destroyed the cherry blossoms that had just bloomed. Moreover, the second and third layer of hailstones did not stop falling. It seemed like they had no intention of stopping. Not good! Seeing the power of the hailstones, Fairy Xiangfeng's pride was crushed in her heart. She hurriedly released her spiritual will to form more cherry blossoms. Of course, the cherry blossoms were destroyed by the hailstones again. Fairy Xiangfeng was indeed a late-stage yuanying cultivator. She was extremely proficient in controlling her spiritual will and coordinating her spells. In the time it took to brew a cup of tea, she had already formed close to 100 layers of cherry blossoms. These 100 layers of cherry blossoms blocked the 100 layers of hailstones, protecting her from being injured by the hailstones. Woo! When there was a gap, Fairy Xiangfeng immediately activated her yuanying hand. The yuanying hand grew to the size of a few mu and grabbed towards the sky. In an instant, the entire layer of clouds was torn apart. Fairy Xiangfeng took this opportunity to retreat. However, the moment the layer of clouds was torn apart, the hailstones fell onto the yuanying hand. The huge force caused the yuanying hand to collapse. Fairy Xiangfeng had no choice but to continue using her spells to form more cherry blossoms to block the hailstones. Then, she slowly retreated. This repeated for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Fairy Xiangfeng was starting to feel tired. Not only were there too many hailstones, but the force of the hailstones was also too strong. Fairy Xiangfeng's spirit sense was greatly depleted, and she could vaguely feel a tearing sensation coming from her Naiwen palace. Fairy Xiangfeng raised her head and looked at the cherry blossoms that were swept away by the hailstones. The cherry blossoms should have been tens of feet away from Fairy Xiangfeng, but now, they were only tens of feet away from Fairy Xiangfeng's head. Fairy Xiangfeng's heart was filled with bitterness. She did not expect that the spiritual will that she had cultivated for 1,000 years could only last for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Looking at the endless hailstones and the distance she had retreated had already exceeded the distance she had advanced. She still could not see Xiaohua. Fairy Xiangfeng laughed bitterly. Just a moment ago, she was still scheming against Xiaohua. However, she did not expect that she was the stupidest one. "Oh? Taoist Yumeng, so you are here!" At this time, Xiaohua's shocked voice sounded in front of Fairy Xiangfeng. "Just now, this Xiao turned around and could not find you. I did not expect you to fall into a restriction. Taoist Xiao, quickly use your Yuanying hand." Fairy Xiangfeng heard Xiaohua's voice and called out without hesitation. However, just as she said that, she was filled with regret. Yes, this was a dead end. Although she could not escape, why couldn't she drag Xiaohua down with her? Could it be that she was inferior to Fairy Suming? Yuanying hand? How can I use it without magic power? Xiaohua was also shocked. However, looking at the cherry blossoms above Fairy Xiangfeng's head, Xiaohua fell into deep thought. He then looked at the hailstones rushing towards him and quickly slapped his forehead. Boom! His spiritual will rushed out, and a Yuanying hand of several mu in size appeared, tearing apart the hailstones and black clouds above him and Fairy Xiangfeng. Ha ha ha, so that's how it is! Xiaohua was naturally not as foolish as Fairy Xiangfeng. When he saw this, he naturally understood that Fairy Xiangfeng felt extremely bitter in her heart. Taoist Yumeng, follow this Xiao! Xiaohua's Yuanying hand was much more solid than Fairy Xiangfeng's. That layer of hailstones was unable to destroy it. Xiaohua had enough time to find the exit. Ai, many thanks, Taoist Xiao! Fairy Xiangfeng was somewhat helpless. She clearly did not want to obtain any benefits, but in a life and death situation, she had no choice but to follow Xiaohua. Looking at how Xiaohua Dong quickly walked out of the dark clouds, Fairy Xiangfeng squinted her eyes and looked at the previously calm light screen. She bowed and said, I thank Taoist Xiao for your help. It's fine, it's fine. Xiaohua casually waved his hand and said, Follow this Xiao. Don't be careless. This place is really dangerous. Yes. Fairy Xiangfeng slightly gritted her teeth. It was unknown whether the hatred in her heart had increased or decreased. Xiaohua was still leisurely strolling around. However, there was no danger in this stroll. Not to mention hailstones, there were not even pine needles or flying leaves. However, the space was still boundless. It seemed that even if he walked for 10,000 years, it would still be the same. Oh? Why is there wind? Fairy Xiangfeng's heart was not as clear as Xiaohua's. Only now did she notice that the sound of wind when they first entered the space had increased. It made her feel a real chill. Taoist Xiao. Fairy Xiangfeng could not help but say, This wind is somewhat strange. Xiaohua rolled his eyes and said helplessly, Please, fellow Taoist, there is no need for you to say anything. This Xiao has been blown around for a long time. How could I not know? Then, is there any other way out? Fairy Xiangfeng gritted her teeth so hard that they were about to shatter. However, she still held back her anger and asked. Xiaohua shrugged and shook his head. This Xiao does not know. However, this Xiao feels that, as long as there is wind blowing past, there must be an exit. Perhaps the exit of this space is right in front. Are you really stupid or are you pretending to be stupid? Fairy Xiangfeng said angrily. You are talking about an ordinary cave. This is a maze set up by Senior Tsung Langzi? How could there be, Wu? Before Fairy Xiangfeng could finish, a strange gust of wind blew her words back into her throat. Fairy Xiangfeng was caught off guard. Her body tilted slightly. She did not dare to be careless and quickly released her spiritual sense. A several large cover covered her. Whoosh, whoosh! A few terrifying sounds could be heard coming from the cover. Fairy Xiang Feng could see that the cover formed by her divine sense was being torn apart by the strange wind. See! Fairy Xiang Feng sucked in a breath of cold air and said in shock. If this wind landed on my body, if I did not have a magic treasure to protect me, wouldn't my body be cut into pieces? Thinking of this, Fairy Xiang Feng hurriedly looked at Xiaohua. See! Fairy Xiang Feng screamed again as if she had a toothache. Xiaohua, who was not far from Fairy Xiang Feng, was shaking, but he didn't use his divine sense to protect himself. Instead, he simply stretched out his hands and stood there as if he was hugging the wind. The strange wind that could cut through the divine sense barrier blew on Xiaohua's body. His Taoist robe was torn apart like a butterfly, but Xiaohua didn't seem to have heard it. It was as if his body wasn't afraid of it at all. -13. Chapter 37:45. Shameless! Fairy Xiang Feng couldn't help but spit out in shock. This was because the Taoist robe on Xiaohua's body had already begun to shatter, and his arm was already exposed. Inside, there was dark golden skin. Unfortunately, Fairy Xiang Feng was now Yunmingzi. Even if she didn't want to look, she couldn't avoid it. She could only use her divine sense to form a barrier and follow behind Xiaohua with difficulty. Fairy Xiang Feng felt like an ordinary person trudging through a violent gale. As she ventured deeper into the storm, an indescribable feeling of suffocation arose from her Naiwen palace. It was as if the wind had turned into mud, covering her mouth and nose. Her chest heaved rapidly. She wanted to gasp for air, but she couldn't breathe in a single breath of fresh air. Wang wing! Just as Fairy Xiang Feng was about to call out to Xiaohua, the entire space started to shake. The strange wind that was squeezing her to the point of bursting suddenly disappeared. Not good! Xiaohua yelled from afar. Taoist Yunmingzi, quickly come over! Fairy Xiang Feng also felt a sense of danger. She hurriedly rushed over to where Xiaohua was. However, before she could reach Xiaohua's back, she saw a funnel-like object gradually forming in midair in the originally misty space in the distance. The strange wind that had stopped earlier started to grow stronger again. However, this time, the strange wind had a rotational force. Wind! Hurricane! Fairy Xiang Feng blurted out. It's like the tsunamis and hurricanes of the East Sea. She looked at the wobbling funnel in the distance that looked like a baby that couldn't walk yet. That's right! Xiaohua narrowed his eyes. He looked at the hurricane that was slowly moving over and said calmly, This hurricane is the true test of space. The hurricane is moving towards where we need to go. We can't avoid it. Only by using a divine sensibility to escape from the hurricane can we pass Senior Sun Lungzi's test. This is almost impossible. Fairy Xiang Feng smiled bitterly. This old man's spirit energy is already at the upper stage of the 4th grade. Although my spirit energy hasn't undergone any special refinement, before the test, my spirit energy is already somewhat exhausted. My Naiwen palace is abnormally painful. Even a spirit-severing stage cultivator would find it difficult to pass such a trial, let alone a leaving aperture stage cultivator. To nascent soul cultivators like us, this cloudy mountain bewildering formation is a dead end. Perhaps we should have tried to find a way out of the cave just now. Fellow Taoists, do you regret it? Xiaohua asked indifferently as he faced the gale that had already begun to blow. Of course not. Fairy Xiang Feng narrowed her eyes. She knew that her answer was completely irrelevant to Xiaohua's question. That's great! How could Xiaohua know what Fairy Xiang Feng was thinking? He nodded and said, Since you don't regret, then protect yourself first. Let me see if I can bring you out of this hurricane. You? And bring me along? Fairy Xiang Feng was in disbelief. It's a pity that this Zhao's nation armament can't be used, Xiaohua said somewhat regretfully. Otherwise, this Xiao would have collected you first, and things would have been much easier. Perhaps. Fairy Xiang Feng declined to comment. How could she be willing to fall into Xiaohua's hands? While they were speaking, the gale had already closed in. The surrounding space had already formed a huge whirlpool under the enormous hurricane force. Xiaohua looked at this huge funnel hurricane. It was very similar to the huge whirlpool under Yaotai Mountain. However, this funnel's might was far inferior to that whirlpool. Okay, now is the time! Seeing that Xiaohua was about to be blown away by the hurricane, Xiaohua roared and shouted. Fellow Taoist El Dreamy, quickly stretch out your arm. Oh, okay. Fairy Xiang Feng's barrier was already on the verge of shattering. Hearing Xiaohua's roar, she was slightly startled and immediately stretched out her arm. Let's go. Xiaohua grabbed Fairy Xiang Feng's arm. His body flew up gracefully and started to spin in the direction of the hurricane. How is this possible? Fairy Xiang Feng saw that Xiaohua was flying extremely steadily as though he was using a flying technique. She naturally did not dare to believe it. However, when she scanned with her spiritual will, she immediately understood. Xiaohua actually used his spiritual will to form 2 wings on his back. Now, with a flap of the wings, he actually flew up. While Fairy Xiang Feng was dumbfounded, Xiaohua's little tail had already started to curl up. When he felt the strange wind, he was already thinking about how to escape. When he was fighting with Kong Han Wu at the foot of Yaoai Mountain, Kong Han Wu's sacred art of transforming his Aoran Qi into wings immediately appeared in his mind. Kong Han Wu had already refined his spirit to the void and could form wings. Although Xiaohua's cultivation did not have such a divine ability, his spiritual will was far superior to Kong Han Wu's. Now, he actually succeeded. Of course, to form wings with his spiritual will to fly, he still had to resist the hurricane. Xiaohua's spiritual will was greatly exhausted. However, Xiaohua had plenty of experience fighting against the hurricane. Thus, he was not in any danger. God! After a long time, this thought appeared in Fairy Xiang Feng's mind. To be able to form wings with his spiritual will, especially without the use of any spells, meant that his control over his spiritual will was extremely precise. It was something that she could not even imagine. Moreover, she knew very well that if one did not have an ancient secret technique, it would be impossible to cultivate this divine ability successfully. At least from what Fairy Xiang Feng had seen, there was no second person like this in the entire hidden immortal continent. Xiang Tian, of all people, why did you have to offend him? Fairy Xiang Feng felt a sense of helplessness. If what Xiaohua said is true, why did you? Thinking of this, Fairy Xiang Feng did not know what to think or how to complain. Rumble! Fairy Xiang Feng's entire body shook. Even Xiaohua's body was somewhat unbalanced. Xiaohua's spiritual will wings were somewhat messy. In an instant, the 2 of them were like 2 balls of paper dancing in the wind. Rumble! Fairy Xiang Feng's entire body shook. Even Xiaohua's body was somewhat unbalanced. Xiaohua's spiritual will wings were somewhat messy. In an instant, the 2 of them were like 2 balls of paper dancing in the wind. Xiaohua very naturally loosened his grip and was about to cast a spell. At this moment, Fairy Xiang Feng's figure floated to Xiaohua's back along with the wind. Xiaohua's dark golden neck was only a few feet away from Fairy Xiang Feng's head. Fairy Xiang Feng's eyes opened wide. Her eyes flashed and her hand on her chest involuntarily moved to her waist. However, when she felt the sharp protrusion on her waist, a rare trace of hesitation appeared in Fairy Xiang Feng's heart. However, this hesitation disappeared in a flash. Fairy Xiang Feng moved her finger and was about to take out the sharp protrusion. At this moment, Xiaohua suddenly shouted, "Damn it, this old man forgot that spiritual power cannot be used. Watch this old man." As he spoke, Xiaohua's spirit sense changed in the air again. A flying boat that looked like a flying leaf appeared below Xiaohua and Fairy Xiang Feng. Xiaohua stepped on it and waved his hand. "Taoist El Dreamy, come on up quickly! This Xiao understands." Fairy Xiang Feng saw that the opportunity to assassinate Xiaohua had disappeared and felt rather regretful. She had no choice but to step on the flying boat. She smiled and said, What did Taoist Xiao understand? This is Senior Tsung Lang Zi testing our spiritual will. Not only is it testing the thickness of our spiritual will, it is also testing the control of our spiritual will. In this space, all spiritual power is empty. There is only spiritual will. Spiritual will is spiritual power. Xiao Hua was somewhat excited. He looked at the flying boat and shouted, "Spiritual will can even replace magic treasures." Fairy Xiang Feng looked at the excited Xiao Hua with disdain. She already knew this when she first fell into the trap. However, she still agreed. Taoist Xiao is truly powerful. Even now, this old man still does not understand how Yuanying's hand is used. Furthermore, look at Taoist Zhao's wings and this flying boat, it is truly amazing. This is nothing. Xiao Hua smiled and shook his head. Just as he was about to speak, rumble! There was another huge tremor. The flying boat instantly disintegrated into nothingness. Xiao Hua seemed to be prepared for this. He reached out and grabbed Fairy Xiang Feng again. His divine intent condensed again. This time, Fairy Xiang Feng was even more dumbfounded. Under his divine intent, a pair of 100-meter-long wings appeared on Xiao Hua's back. When the wings spread, it gave off the feeling of a great rock soaring 90,000 miles with the wind. I must have seen wrongly. Fairy Xiang Feng did not dare to believe her spiritual will. This pair of wings was extremely realistic. Not only were the huge wings flapping in the whirlwind, but the feathers on the wings were also trembling. It was as though real feathers were fluttering in the air. With the wings formed by his spiritual will, Xiao Hua was like a bird in the sky, free and unrestrained in the whirlwind. During this period, the wings formed by his spiritual will were shattered hundreds of times. However, every time they were shattered, the wings would immediately reappear. Xiao Hua's body did not even sway. Fairy Xiang Feng's spiritual will was constantly staring at Xiao Hua's back. Seeing how miraculous Xiao Hua's spiritual will was, her heart turned cold. She had activated her divine sense to protect her own body. No one knew better than her about the hurricane and the force behind it that Xiao Hua was currently facing. No one understood better than her how difficult it was to condense a pair of wings with one's divine sense in this hurricane. Not only that, at the very beginning, when she was struggling with Xiao Hua in the whirlwind, Xiao Hua's body was constantly swaying. His entire body was also trembling. However, after half a meal, she discovered that Xiao Hua's body was gradually stabilizing. His entire body seemed to be one with the wings on his back. He was like a real bird circling in the whirlwind. The whirlwind was naturally not an ordinary one. Not only did it have a terrifying wind force, there were also small whirlpools within the whirlwind. These whirlpools also had a tearing force. The barrier formed by Fairy Xiang Feng's spiritual will was shattered by these whirlpools. However, since Fairy Xiang Feng could protect herself, there was no need to mention Xiao Hua. -13. Chapter 3746. Xiao Hua didn't know how big this hurricane was. After flying for several hours, he finally saw the edge of the hurricane. Only then did the oppressive force begin to slowly lessen. Haha, if that's the case, then we don't need to fly anymore. Xiao Hua did his best to rush out of the hurricane, and shouted with a loud laugh. But just as he shouted, Xiao Hua's body suddenly fell, and his face became deathly pale. After Xiao Hua stabilized his body, a pair of wings that were only a few feet long grew out, and slowly brought Xiao Hua and Fairy Xiang Feng down. Xiao Hua bitterly smiled and said, "Taoist El Dreamy, this Zhao's spirit sense has been greatly exhausted. It seems that we can only walk step by step. No worries." Fairy Xiang Feng's eyes flashed and smiled. "I'm already very satisfied to be able to escape with Taoist Yun Meng's blessing. What's wrong with walking a few more steps?" "Okay, we'll walk slowly," Xiao Hua said as he released his hand. Fairy Xiang Feng also transformed into a simple flying boat and descended from the sky. After Fairy Xiang Feng landed, she immediately placed her hand on her waist and bit her lip. At this moment, other than spiritual will, There were no other sacred arts that could be used. Xiao Hua's struggle in the hurricane had already exhausted his spiritual will. Fairy Xiang Feng didn't think that Xiao Hua would have a stronger spiritual will than her when her own Naiwen palace was in extreme pain. See, not good! Before Fairy Xiang Feng could take out the item, Xiao Hua looked into the distance with a puzzled expression. What's wrong? Taoist Xiao? Fairy Xiang Feng moved her hand away from her waist and looked into the distance, and released her spirit sense again. However, the area dozens of miles in front of him was still empty, and there was nothing suspicious about it. Listen, Xiao Hua was very mysterious. He put his index finger on his mouth and whispered. Fairy Xiang Feng frowned and listened attentively. Sure enough, in just a few moments, her expression changed drastically. That was because there was a slight vibration coming from the wind. It was slow and rhythmic. Even though the vibration was slight, it covered a huge area. Fairy Xiang Feng's expression changed not only because of the vibration but also because of Xiao Hua's sharp senses. If not for Xiao Hua's warning, Fairy Xiang Feng wouldn't have noticed it. This must be another test. Fairy Xiang Feng's mouth was bitter as she looked at Xiao Hua and asked in a low voice. Xiao Hua looked around and nodded. Yes, and it came from the path we had to pass. I'm afraid we can't avoid it. If, Fairy Xiang Feng suggested, we can avoid the trap first. With Taoist Zhao's ability, the trap won't be able to hurt us. Then, we can avoid the test. At this point, Fairy Xiang Feng didn't even want to continue. She knew that there was no need to test it. The trap before the hurricane and after the hurricane were definitely different. Since it was a test, even if they hid in the trap, they might not be able to avoid the test. Let's go. Xiao Hua waved his hand. Let's see what the test. All right. Fairy Xiang Feng had no choice but to agree. I will need your help in the next test. At the same time, Fairy Xiang Feng felt a sense of guilt. That's right, why did I come to the Misty Mountain Maze Formation? Taoist Xiao Hua to avenge Taoist Xiang Tian. But, before she could do anything, Xiao Hua had helped her time and time again. Treasures, opportunities, and now, her life was saved by him several times. She even had to ask him to take care of her here. How could she do anything? Kill! Thinking of this, Fairy Xiang Feng wiped away her good intentions. There are no good men in this world. Xiao Hua is just trying to buy people's hearts. Roar! After walking for half a cup of tea's time, a huge brown bear charged over from afar. This brown bear was more than 10 zhang tall, and its fur was standing on end. The brown bear was running on all fours. Occasionally, it would stand up and roar towards the sky. Its arms were waving crazily in the air. I understand. Seeing the brown bear, Fairy Xiang Feng immediately thought of the shape of the tunnel. How could she not know that this brown bear was the final test of the maze? But since it was the final test, the danger was self-evident. If it's just one or two, then it's fine. Xiao Hua was very calm. He squinted his eyes at the approaching brown bear and said, If it's a group, then it will be troublesome. That's right. A light flashed in front of Fairy Xiang Feng. A spear appeared and floated in the air. I can't just hide. I'll help Taoist Xiao. Okay. Xiao Hua nodded and continued to walk towards the brown bear. Fairy Xiang Feng reached out and grabbed the spear. A cold feeling came from the spear. Fairy Xiang Feng waved the spear and a gust of wind came. It was no different from a real spear. Fairy Xiang Feng looked again. She really did not understand how this space was set up. Could it be, tribulation passing cultivators are really omnipotent in this cultivation world? Fairy Xiang Feng was a little excited. But soon, the excitement turned into a sigh. Pity. I won't be able to see my tribulation passing realm in this life. Thump, thump, thump. As the brown bear ran, the ground beneath Fairy Xiang Feng's feet began to tremble. The bear, which was hundreds of feet long, now looked extremely ferocious. An unpleasant stench assaulted her nostrils. Fairy Xiang Feng could even clearly see the blood-red eyes of the brown bear. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to act, Fairy Xiangfeng roared. Kill! As if she wanted to vent the hatred in her heart, the spear in Fairy Xiangfeng's hand flew straight towards the chest of the brown bear. Roar! The spear was like lightning, and the brown bear went crazy. The bear's paw slapped on the spear, but the strength of the spear was enough. The bear's paw bounced back as if it had been electrocuted. Pooh! The moment the bear's paw bounced back, the spear pierced the brown bear's chest. However, the long spear pierced through the bear's chest, and it flew straight for 100 meters before slowly disappearing. The brown bear still rushed forward for a few meters, then it fell to the ground and disappeared in a moment, while howling. Good! Xiaohua gave a thumbs up. Taoist Yimeng is really good. Thank you, Fairy Xiangfeng said modestly. Another spear appeared in her hand. However, this time, Fairy Xiangfeng's gaze fell on Xiaohua's throat. Dong, dong, dong! The ground shook again. Even more stench came from afar, and even more screams came from afar. Kill, kill, kill! Fairy Xiangfeng moved her gaze away from Xiaohua and looked into the distance. That group of brown bears had turned into Xiaohus. When these brown bears were close enough, Fairy Xiangfeng roared and waved her arms. Spears flew out of her hands and killed the brown bears one after another. They fell down and disappeared. Seeing Fairy Xiangfeng so fierce, Xiaohua was surprised. However, he didn't have time to think about Fairy Xiangfeng's transformation. He released his divine sense and looked at the seemingly endless brown bears. These brown bears were not like the hurricane from before. They were extremely lethal. Moreover, seeing Fairy Xiangfeng's spear attack, some of the brown bears were already able to block it. Needless to say, the brown bears behind were even more powerful. Presumably, the spear would not be able to kill them easily. What should he and Fairy Xiangfeng do when they encounter such a brown bear? Could it be Senior Tsung Longzi really wants to kill the Dao sect juniors who enter the maze? Xiaohua was confused. If that's the case, why did the previous maze have a cultivation technique? But if he only wants to test the cultivation of the cultivators who enter the maze, why does he have to kill them like this? Even with Yunmingzi's late-stage Yuanning cultivation, he can't handle it. I understand now. Thinking of this, Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization. Sang Longzi was an ancient cultivator who went through the tribulation. Let's not talk about his own cultivation, just the cultivation of the other Taoist seniors should be around the 7th or 8th stage. As for the 2 layers of formations that Senior Tsung Longzi set up outside the maze, it would be difficult to break through without a 7th or 8th grade essence force. Therefore, the maze within the cave is naturally targeted at the 8th grade essence force. Even though the maze has been worn down for millions of years and its power is very weak, the maze within the cave is much weaker than the maze outside. Therefore, its power is much greater. Damn it, it seems like I have harmed everyone. If it weren't for Xiaohua, Zhang Daoran and the others wouldn't even be able to break through the outer formation. How could they enter the maze? If they couldn't enter the maze, they wouldn't lose their lives. Seeing how Fairy Xiangfeng was facing such a difficult situation, Xiaohua could already imagine the danger Sun Kong and the others were facing. If they lost their lives, it would be Xiaohua's fault. Xiaohua couldn't help but recall what Fairy Jing had said to him in front of Heartbreak Mountain, as well as her advice to him. Yes, an ancient maze. It's not something we can easily enter with the Dao sect in its declining state. Xiaohua sighed and condensed his spiritual will into a hammer. Boom! The hammer fell and several brown bears were reduced to nothingness as they howled in grief. Ah! Fairy Xiangfeng was caught unprepared. She cried out in surprise and the spear in her hand stopped moving. Looking at the hammer that destroyed several brown bears, she fell into a daze. She knew in her heart that although her spear was powerful, the spear itself was made of spiritual will. Every time she used it, she would consume some of it. Her already sore Naiwen palace was now in a tearing pain. She simply could not hold on for too long. But looking at Xiaohua, his spiritual will was like a hammer. How much spiritual will did he consume? Could it be that Xiaohua didn't consume much spiritual will in the hurricane? -13. Chapter 37:47. Taoist Master Xiao. Fairy Xiang Feng suddenly felt a sense of relief. She laughed and said, "Since we can't retreat, why don't we just charge forward? We can kill as many brown bears as we can. This old man is satisfied to be able to die together with Taoist Master Xiao." "Good. As you wish." Xiao Hua was also filled with lofty sentiments. He loudly responded and pounced towards the brown bears. As Xiao Hua's figure moved, boom, 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 huge rumbling sounds came from midair. The entire space shook. Huge rocks fell from the sky like falling stars, smashing towards the thousands of brown bears. Fairy Xiang Feng was stunned for a moment. She smiled bitterly and also charged forward. The long spear in her hand stabbed out. Fairy Xiang Feng had already made her decision. Perhaps only if she died under the paws of the brown bears would she not hesitate to kill Xiao Hua. Perhaps if she and Xiao Hua both died here, she would be able to take revenge for Taoist Master Xiang Tian. As the two of them charged into the group of brown bears, an apocalyptic scene appeared. Huge rocks fell from the sky and smashed into the ground. Along with the deafening sound, the brown bears disappeared one by one. Although there was no smoke or dust, within a radius of a few li, there were cries and cries everywhere. Fairy Xiang Feng first tried her best to use her spiritual sense to kill the brown bears. However, after an unknown period of time, her spiritual sense had already dried up. Not to mention the long spear, she could not even condense a blade of grass. At the same time, Fairy Xiang Feng did not know how long she had been running with Xiao Hua. A fatigue that she had not felt in 1,000 years appeared in her body. When she looked at Xiao Hua again, she saw that he was no longer as vigorous as before. The falling rocks in the sky had also become sparse. However, the brown bears in front of Xiao Hua and Fairy Xiang Feng were still endless. They could not kill them all. "Xiang Tian, this concubine will follow you. You will not be lonely in the underworld," Fairy Xiang Feng muttered in her heart. Her body also slowed down. "Damn it!" Seeing Fairy Xiang Feng land, Xiao Hua also stopped. He shouted, "Taoist Yun Meng, hold on for a while longer. I'm afraid this old man cannot hold on anymore." Fairy Xiang Feng smiled sadly. "This old man, although I was prepared and thought of the ending, this old man never thought of the process." "Ending? Process?" Xiao Hua was startled. Suddenly his eyes lit up. He looked at the brown bears that filled his vision, then turned back to look at the sky from before. He said confidently, "Taoist Elmar, please wait a moment. I understand. Spiritual Master Xiao." Fairy Xiang Feng was slightly surprised. She raised her head and saw several huge rocks exploding in midair. Each of the huge rocks formed a huge whirlpool. These whirlpools quickly gathered at one spot and finally formed a whirlpool that was dozens of feet in size. This whirlpool spun rapidly and gradually expanded. As it expanded, the suction force increased as well. Oh! At first, the brown bears didn't care at all and pounced on Xiao Hua and the others. But before they could get close, the vortex sucked them in. When the suction force was enough, the brown bears flew up from the ground and landed in the vortex. Not only that, as the brown bears landed in the vortex expanded again and pounced on the ground. "See!" Fairy Xiang Feng saw this and immediately understood Xiao Hua's intention. This was an unimaginable idea. Since spiritual will could condense into anything, then the brown bears were naturally condensed by something similar to spiritual will. Xiao Hua used his spiritual will to condense into a vortex, and used his unimaginable spiritual will to push the vortex to suck the brown bears into the vortex. Then, not only could he kill the brown bears, after the brown bears were killed, their spiritual will would fuse into the vortex and increase the suction force of the vortex. This way, the vortex would be pushed one after another. Naturally, it was much more effective than the falling rocks and spears. "Go!" Xiao Hua shouted. His face was as pale as paper. However, the huge vortex had already escaped from Xiao Hua's control and slowly flew into the distance. As the vortex flew, more and more brown bears were sucked in. Boom! Xiaohua's body fell to the ground. He groaned in extreme exhaustion and said, Taoist Elmar, this Zhao's Naiwen palace no longer has a trace of spiritual will. Let's rest for a while. Let's wait for this space to collapse. Rest is a must. Fairy Xiang Feng clenched her teeth. She stood up not far away and walked to Xiaohua's side. She took out a few qilong fang from her waist. This fang was blood red and almost transparent. At the tip of the fang, there was a trace of black. Furthermore, Taoist Xiao does not need to worry about resting anymore. Taoist Elmar? What is the meaning of this? Xiaohua lay on the ground weakly. Seeing Fairy Xiang Feng walking over with her fang, he asked curiously. Ha ha! Fairy Xiang Feng saw Xiaohua's confusion and laughed. What meaning can this concubine have? This concubine is only here to take the life of another. You! Xiaohua was shocked. He hurriedly tried to crawl up from the ground. Unfortunately, after struggling for a while, he could only barely sit up. He looked at Fairy Xiang Feng and said, You are not Elmar? Of course this concubine is not Elmar. Fairy Xiang Feng laughed sharply. This concubine is Fairy Xiang Feng. You personally killed that Reverend Xiang Tian's dual cultivation partner. How is this possible? Xiaohua looked at Fairy Xiang Feng and said in shock. You are clearly a male cultivator. Before I reached the Yuanying stage, I was naturally a male cultivator. Fairy Xiang Feng smiled sinisterly. But after reaching the Yuanying stage, I became a female. I understand. Xiaohua had already calmed down. He nodded and said, This Xiao has heard about your matter. At that time, this Xiao also sympathized with you. Sympathize? Is there any use in sympathizing? Fairy Xiangfeng's face showed loneliness. Sympathy can only be cheered by the weak. When I reached the late Yuanying stage, there was no sympathy in this world. Forget it. Since you want to take revenge for Reverend Xiang Tian, this Xiao also has nothing to say. However, this Xiao has already told you the ins and outs of the matter clearly. Xiaohua sighed and said, Although you love Reverend Xiang Tian, your love is already a burden. It is this love that led Reverend Xiang Tian to his death. Perhaps this Xiao will let him off in this Jade Pavilion gathering. However, there will be a day when he will die from his arrogance. No matter what, whoever killed Xiang Tian, I will kill that person. Fairy Xiang Feng said coldly. I do not care who is right or wrong. Xiaohua stared at Fairy Xiang Feng and asked, Even if it is your life savior? That's right. Fairy Xiang Feng replied without hesitation. Reverend Xiao has saved me many times. I have long remembered it in my heart. Previously, I also had many opportunities to kill Reverend Xiaohua, but I was hesitating. Because this space is truly dangerous. No one can guarantee that they will be able to leave alive. If Reverend Xiang Tian and I were to die here, I naturally would not kill anyone. Unfortunately, Reverend Dao's methods are heaven-defying. Such a difficult problem was easily solved by you. I have no choice but to take action. However, Reverend Xiao, please do not worry. I will not live alone. As long as Reverend Xiao dies in my hands, I will immediately commit suicide to repay Reverend Xiao for saving my life. Just based on the fang in your hand? Xiaohua said coldly. Do you think that it can pierce through this Xiao's diamond body? Reverend Xiao, I am afraid that you do not know what I am holding in my hand. Fairy Xiang Feng said coldly. This is a venomous dragon fang. Not only is it incomparably sharp, it is also extremely poisonous. Even if you have cultivated some diamond body, you will not be able to block this fang. The venomous dragon fang might not be able to pierce you to death, but the poison is enough to kill you. See. Xiaohua sucked in a breath of cold air. Fear appeared on his pale face. However, after a moment, Xiaohua sighed. Forget it. This Xiao is indeed too kind. Although your background is somewhat strange, this Xiao did not look into it. This entire time, I have been taking care of you, protecting you to this place. Since you insist on taking this Zhao's life, this Zhao does not even have the strength to truss a chicken. I can only let you do as you wish. Come, as long as you do not let down your conscience, then do it. Conscience? Is there still a conscience in this world? Fairy Xiangfeng was somewhat agitated. When I was being bullied by those filthy people, where did their conscience go? Where are those people with a conscience? The suffering that I went through, who would know? Whenever this concubine is mentioned, who would think of the suffering that this concubine went through? They only think of filthy people, they only know how to say that my methods are ruthless. Even, there were cultivators who came to bully me after I formed my nascent soul. They keep saying that they look up to me. Where did their conscience go? Although Xiangtian is somewhat arrogant, he always protects me and gives in to me in everything. He never mentions anything that makes me unhappy. In my eyes, he is the one with the most conscience. Just for this so-called conscience, you go against your conscience to kill this Zhao? Xiaohua said coldly. What is the difference between you and those people who humiliated you? There is no point in saying more, Taoist Zhao. Fairy Xiangfeng raised the venomous dragon Fang and said indifferently, if not for the fact that you are my savior, I would definitely not say so much to you. I would definitely not let you know the truth. As she spoke, the venomous dragon Fang descended like lightning. However, before it even landed halfway, Fairy Xiangfeng's hands began to tremble. Her entire body began to tremble and tears began to flow from her eyes. Who knows how many years she had persevered, but at this moment, she finally collapsed. Fairy Xiangfeng raised her hand and shouted towards the sky. Xiangtian, you are forcing this concubine. Although this concubine has always doted on you and this concubine has never allowed you to do anything outrageous, how much have you done behind this concubine's back? Do you think this concubine does not know? This concubine has always been lucky and felt that perhaps no one would dare to touch you. However, this concubine knows that if you continue to act like this, something will happen sooner or later. Xiangtian, it is not that this concubine does not want to take revenge for you. However, if this concubine kills Taoist Zhao, this concubine is no better than a pig or a dog. What is the difference between this concubine and those animals? Xiangtian, wait for this concubine will follow you. As she spoke, Fairy Xiangfeng raised the venomous dragon Fang and descended towards her snow-white neck. -13. Chapter 37:48. However, the moment the venomous dragon tooth was about to land, a powerful force grabbed Fairy Xiangfeng's hand. Who? Fairy Xiangfeng turned pale with fright and looked around. There is no one else in this space. Xiaohua stood up with a smile on his face and said with a smile. Fairy Xiangfeng looked like she saw a ghost and said in shock. You, don't ask me if I'm fine. Xiaohua shrugged. This Zhao is naturally fine. How can you be fine? Even if it's a 7th grade spirit sense, it would be unavoidable for it to dry up here, right? Fairy Xiangfeng was shocked. Then, she exclaimed, could it be that you already knew that I am Fairy Xiangfeng? Spirit sense, let's not talk about it. That's this Zhao's secret, I can't tell my enemies. Xiaohua said with a smile. But speaking of your reason, this Zhao was already vigilant, and was basically certain. How did you know? Since you were suspicious and even certain, why did you save me? Fairy Xiangfeng was confused. Xiaohua shrugged and said with a smile. Firstly, when Fairy was breaking the seal in the cave, you didn't use your natal magic artifact at the start. Presumably, you were trying to hide something? Fairy Xiangfeng clenched her teeth and didn't say anything. You let Diquan lead the way and hide yourself. You thought that nobody would know, but Diquan's occasional questions were all directed at Fairy. Doesn't that mean you're the mastermind? Especially, when choosing the passage, Diquan and the rest rushed to choose others. Obviously, they wanted to leave this Zhao last and be separated with you. Isn't that a flaw? Because they knew you wanted to kill this Zhao and they knew they weren't my match. Since you knew you weren't my match and still wanted to kill this Zhao, Then if you're not Fairy Xiang Feng, who are you? Also, even though Fairy changed your appearance and your yuanying is also a male, the fragrance on Fairy's body is still there. This can't help but make this Xiao suspicious. Fairy Xiang Feng bit her lips and retorted. That's what you thought after the fact. Xiao Hua ignored Fairy Xiang Feng and said, As for why I saved you, it's because you're different from Fairy Su Ming. Fairy Su Ming is extremely arrogant and wanted to perish together with me when she saw me. As for you, even though your temperament has changed greatly, this is all because of the evil others have done to you. So you chose to fight evil with evil. What's more, once you cultivate to the 4th grade of essence force, others will fear you. You won't be able to experience the kindness of others. This Xiao feels that if you can experience the good in this world, perhaps the evil in your heart will decrease. Therefore, this Xiao cannot not save you. This Xiao hopes that there will be more good in this world. Fairy Xiang Feng's tears flowed down as if no one had ever said such words to her in her life. With evil in one's heart, no matter how high one's cultivation is, one's heart won't be calm, and one's foundation won't be firm. Only with kindness in one's heart can one have a clear path between heaven and earth. Xiao Hua continued. Back then, I met a fish called Little Cabbage. Xiao Hua narrated the story of Little Cabbage, causing Fairy Xiang Feng's face to be filled with tears and grief. Finally, Xiao Hua smiled and said, And you did not disappoint this Xiao. There's a saying in Buddhism that one can become a Buddha by letting go of the butcher's knife. Fairy is that fearless Buddha, a Buddha that has cut off the evil in your heart, a Buddha that has cut off everything from your past. I believe that with today's kindness and resolution, as well as the comprehension in the maze array, Fairy's future will be immeasurable. This concubine understands. Fairy Xiang Feng stopped crying and said with a choked voice, Many thanks, Taoist, for your explanation. Even though this concubine cannot let go of the hatred in my heart, this concubine will try to think of Taoist's kindness in the future and treat people with kindness. Good, if Fairy understands, this Xiao will let you go. Xiao Hua nodded. But, if you let go of the venomous dragon tooth, this Xiao will take it away to prevent any more evil thoughts in your heart. And, this concubine understands. Fairy Xiang Feng let go of the venomous dragon tooth and Xiao Hua also retracted his Buddha sense. As soon as Xiao Hua retracted his Buddha sense, Fairy Xiang Feng immediately collapsed to the ground. Her state of mind changed so drastically in such a short period of time, it was really hard for her to accept. Without arcane energy, she was no different from an ordinary female cultivator. Kacha. At this time, a crisp cracking sound came from the distance, and cracks filled the sky in an instant. It was Xiao Hua who had used the space to condense the vortex, and used the space's divine sense to break the space's restriction. Following the space's rupture, divine sense attacks that were 100 times more powerful than the soul stabs swept across the sky, as if the space was struggling on its deathbed. How could Fairy Xiang Feng withstand these divine sense attacks? She screamed and fainted on the ground. On the other hand, layers of golden light appeared outside Xiao Hua's Naiwen Palace as the innate divine restriction blocked the attacks. Weng. The moment the space cracked, Xiao Hua sensed the heaven and earth yuan qi. He quickly slapped his hand and summoned the Kunlun mirror. While keeping Fairy Xiang Feng into the Kunlun ruins, he also kept the venomous dragon tooth into his spatial dimension. Sigh, poor Fairy Xiang Feng. Xiao Hua kept the Kunlun mirror and sighed in his heart. Just as he said, if Fairy Xiang Feng was like Fairy Su Ming and attacked without any care, Xiao Hua would not hold back either. However, with Fairy Xiang Feng's probing and Xiao Hua's vigilance, Xiao Hua gradually recalled the words about Fairy Xiang Feng's background. As the saying goes, a pitiful person must have a hateful side. At the same time, a hateful person would also have a pitiful side. Ordinary people with a compassionate heart would sigh at Fairy Xiang Feng's background, not to mention Xiao Hua, a cultivator with a compassionate heart of a Buddhist sect. Along the way, Xiao Hua was both on guard and enlightening her. Now, it seemed that it was still very effective. Fairy Xiang Feng was able to rein in the horse at the last moment. It could not be said that she had thrown away her burden, but at least, she was not ruthlessly destroyed by Xiaohua. After this lesson, this poor person might have an epiphany. With the gains from the Misty Mountain Maze formation, her cultivation level will also improve. Her life will be exciting again. At this moment, the space within the maze formation collapsed, and the surroundings were in chaos. The omnipresent waves were more powerful than a forest of blades and spears, wreaking havoc in the entire space. The target of these waves was the Naiwen Palace. If it were not for the innate divine restriction outside Xiaohua's Naiwen Palace, he would have been rolling on the ground in pain. If it were a serious injury, his Naiwen Palace would have been torn apart by the waves. This Xiao is really lucky. Xiaohua could sense that the innate divine restriction in his Naiwen Palace was flashing with golden light. Layers upon layers of divine miracles that seemed to be in a deep slumber began to awaken. One after another, ordinary or strange star charts appeared above his Naiwen Palace, revealing their majesty amidst the golden light. Xiaohua could not help but sigh. I wonder where this innate divine restriction came from. It has saved this Zhao's life time and time again. Hornwood dragon, fighting wood vermin, Kui wood wolf, these are the real innate divine restrictions. How can those sinners of Star-Lord Palace represent them? That's right, other than the rabbit and the capital Sky Star formation and the rooster and the plentiful Sun Devil devouring Immortal formation, there were even more lightning dragons, tigers and leopards appearing in the golden light. The original names of these innate divine restrictions did not matter. No one knew if they existed or not. Since the Immortal Palace or the Tao sect gave these rather interesting names based on the appearance of these innate divine restrictions, they would be called these names. If the Immortal Palace could use them, so could the Tao sect. With the activation of the innate divine restriction, traces of obscure waves rushed into Xiaohua's space. They either landed on the green-robed Xiaohua's body or in the starry sky of the Tao of Heaven Xiaohua. Xiaohua understood that this was the comprehension of the innate divine restriction. If his 10 avatars could comprehend all of these divine restrictions, his cultivation would definitely improve beyond his wildest dreams. Thinking of this, Xiaohua's avatar rushed into the space. He ignored the green-robed Xiaohua and landed in the starry sky. He cupped his hands and said, Tao friend Tao of Heaven Tao, I greet you. There was no sound or movement in the starry sky. However, Xiaohua knew that Tao of Heaven Tao had heard him. He continued, I know that this innate divine restriction is very abstruse. Ordinary cultivators can't comprehend it. Even if it's the green-robed Tao friend, his main body wouldn't allow him to comprehend the abstruse of the divine restriction. Only Tao friend Tao of Heaven Tao, whose main body is the abstruse of the Tao of Heaven, is able to comprehend this innate divine restriction naturally. Furthermore, you won't suffer any backlash from the divine restriction. You will be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. Therefore, on behalf of the other Tao friends, I earnestly request Tao friend to comprehend these innate divine restrictions. The entire starry sky suddenly stopped. It was very strange. However, in just a moment, the waves coming from the Naiwen Palace seemed to be grabbed by a big hand and didn't go anywhere else. They were all thrown into the starry sky. It was like a stone thrown into the water. In an instant, the entire starry sky became alive again. At the same time, waves of comprehension rushed towards Xiaohua like a mountain flood and a tsunami. Xiaohua hurriedly cut off these comprehensions. He smiled bitterly and said, Tao friend Tao of Heaven Tao, I'll leave these comprehensions with you first. When I have the time, I'll slowly absorb them. Although you and I have the same comprehension, this huge amount of comprehension is enough to make I explode. Following Xiaohua's voice, the huge amount of waves instantly disappeared and turned into a trickle. Many thanks, Tao friend. Xiaohua cupped his hands and came out of the space. However, just as Xiaohua's consciousness came out, he immediately felt that something was wrong. This was because when Xiaohua entered this spiritual sense space, he was inside the passage of the Misty Mountain Maze formation. Although this passage was tall and spacious, it was still limited. If the spiritual sense space collapsed, the passage would inevitably be revealed. Now, the spiritual sense attack in the entire space had already disappeared. The feeling of light had already weakened. The passage from before still hadn't revealed itself. In particular, Xiaohua felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly released his Buddhist sense. Although his Buddhist sense couldn't be compared to his spiritual sense, it still couldn't find the end of the space. -13. Chapter 3749. This is. Xiaohua, who had already grasped the pearl of wisdom, began to wonder. He couldn't imagine what kind of difficulties there would be after the test of the divine sense space. Boom, boom, boom! Just as Xiaohua released his Buddhist sense to explore his surroundings, suddenly, from the four corners of the space, 4 pillars of aeon qi soared into the sky and wrapped around Xiaohua. The 4 pillars of boundless qi fell from the sky and condensed into 4 strange shapes. They looked like beasts, but also like something else. They couldn't be identified. Once these 4 boundless qi forms were formed, a kind of aura that could suppress everything was emitted from them. It quickly filled the entire space. What was special was that these 4 similar auras were mixed together like water and milk. They surged and rushed towards Xiaohua. Not only that, when the aura sealed the space, thousands of inscriptions gushed out from the 4 aeon qi forms, condensing into sentences and articles one by one, and finally forming a book that covered the entire space. How can this be? Is it possible that they want to test the cultivation of a Confucian cultivator now? Xiaohua was completely puzzled, somewhat at a loss. Who? Suddenly, Xiaohua's eyes widened, and a fierce look flashed through his eyes. He switched his Buddhist sense to soul sense, and looked below one of the aeon qi forms. Following Xiaohua's stern shout, a Confucian cultivator wearing a brocade robe came out from the aeon qi pillars, but this Confucian cultivator was in a very sorry state. Not only was his hair abnormally messy, but his brocade robe was also torn to pieces. At this time, the Confucian cultivator was holding a square-shaped imperial tool in his hand. Clouds lingered inside, and wisps of aeon qi formed from the void and fell on it. As soon as the Confucian cultivator stepped into the air, he immediately looked at Xiaohua in surprise. His thick eyebrows trembled slightly, and he asked curiously, "Huh? Your divine sense hasn't been exhausted yet? How did you find this old man?" Xiaohua didn't answer the Confucian cultivator's question. He looked at the imperial tool in the Confucian cultivator's hand, then narrowed his eyes and looked at the aeon qi that had already merged together in the air. At this time, how could he not know that this was the Confucian cultivator's origin array? How could he not know that he had fallen into the Confucian cultivator's trap? However, he was very puzzled. Where did this Confucian cultivator come from? How did this Confucian cultivator follow him? How did this Confucian cultivator avoid the spiritual force storm in the spiritual force dimension? Moreover, how did this Confucian cultivator set up such an origin formation in such a short period of time? Sir, as long as you tell me who you are and why you set up this defensive formation, I will tell you how I discovered you. Xiaohua coldly replied. Defensive array? Haha, you really are a half-baked Confucian cultivator. The Confucian cultivator laughed and said, Our Confucian cultivator's array formation is called the origin array. How can it be called the imperial array? The so-called primordial array is also called defensive array is nothing but nonsense. This Xiao's lack of skill is my own problem. I don't need others to lecture me. Xiaohua stared at the Confucian cultivator and asked, I heard that Confucian cultivators are most particular about not changing their names. May I know what your name is? Hee, you are indeed sharp-tongued. It is no wonder that Duan Wuqing lost to you. The Confucian cultivator chuckled and said without hiding anything. Hearing this Confucian cultivator mention Duan Wuqing, Xiaohua's eyes narrowed. He looked at the Confucian cultivator's thick eyebrows and said thoughtfully, So you are from the Duanwu family? That's right. This old man is Duanwu Liangxing. The Confucian cultivator ignored Xiaohua's gaze and calmly replied. Sigh. Seeing this, Xiaohua sighed and said, Although this Xiao is very respectful to Confucian cultivator families, the Duanmu family has really disappointed this Xiao. The reason for this Xiao's enmity with Duanmu Qing is very simple. For this small matter, your Duanmu family first lent a scroll to help the state preceptor of the Bronze Pillar Nation. Now you even sent your excellency to kill this Xiao from afar. Is this the action of a proper Confucian cultivator family? Moreover, this Xiao remembers that Duanmu Qing is only a scholar. In order to deal with this Xiao, the Duanmu family actually sent out a great grandmaster. Don't you think this is shameful? Duanmu Liangxing smiled slightly and stretched out his hand to tidy up the scattered hair on his head. He said, "Fortunately, this old man came. If it was someone else, wouldn't it be like throwing a meat bun to a dog?" As he spoke, Duanmu Liangxing raised his eyes and looked to the left and said, "To be honest, this clan order should not have been accepted by this old man. However, this old man just happened to want to avoid trifling matters within the clan. Therefore, I took the initiative to go to Black Wind Ridge to find you." But what this old man did not expect was that Black Wind Ridge actually had another scenery. With this old man's cultivation, I could not easily enter the formation. This old man already had a premonition in his heart that you were going to give this old man a surprise. When this old man knew that you were going to Yaotai Mountain to participate in the Yaotai gathering, this old man purposely waited for you along the way. Although this old man did not manage to wait for you, this old man heard of Taoist Master Zhao's great name from the mouths of some nascent soul cultivators. At that time, this old man could not help but have a whole new level of respect for you. How could you be the little Confucian cultivator that Duanmu Qing spoke of, who only had the strength of a second or third grade essence force? You could even assassinate the state teacher of the Bronze Pillar State, and even participate in the Yaohai gathering. If you did not have the strength of a fourth grade essence force, this old man's name, Duanmu, would be erased from this old man's name. Moreover, looking at this spiritual sense space, damn it, even this old man's spiritual sense has been messed up. If this old man did not have an imperial equipment passed down from my ancestors, this old man is afraid that before this old man could even see you, I would have been buried here, right? Since that is the case, how confident do you think you are?" Xiao Hua looked at this opponent whose strength was second only to Kong Han Wu and asked indifferently. 90%. Duanmu Liangxing said with great confidence. "Oh?" Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and said with a smile. "You are very conceited." "Of course," Duanmu Liangxing said with a smile. "You only have the strength of a fourth grade essence force, while this old man has the strength of a fifth grade intermediate essence force. How can you be this old man's opponent? Moreover, if there is no accident, this spiritual sense space should have been broken by you, right? This old man does not think that. You still have much spiritual sense in your Naiwen Palace. Lastly, since you are proficient in the array formation of the passageway, you must have seen that you and I are currently inside an essence formation. This essence formation was set up by this old man at the risk of exhausting my spiritual sense. With this essence formation, this old man can replenish the true qi and spiritual sense that I had previously exhausted. If this old man did not have a kind of warning sign, I would definitely say that I am 100% confident. You have calculated very well. Xiao Hua clapped his hands and said, "However, if you use this scheme to bully the weak, even this Xiao would feel ashamed." Duanmu Liangxing smiled faintly and waved his hand, saying, "You are wrong. Today, this old man only needs to kill you here. Who would know that this old man came here? Who would know that my Duanmu family had once made a move against you? You have said so much, could it be that you want to wait for this old man to show mercy? Could it be that you want to wait for other cultivators? No, this Xiao only wants to confirm whether or not you deserve to be killed." Xiao Hua took a deep breath and said coldly as he looked at Duanmu Liangxing, "Ha ha 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 ha, Xiao Hua, you are really too arrogant." Duanmu Liangxing laughed, and at this moment, Xiao Hua's whole body suddenly produced a strange fluctuation. His whole body was like a breeze blowing, and in the blink of an eye, he had already arrived at Duanmu Liangxing's side. He raised his hand and took out the wishful steel staff. Boom! It smashed down with a bang! Puff, puff, puff. Just as the wishful steel staff fell, dozens of great spirit qi were born in mid-air, Although the wishful steel staff was like a hot knife through butter, when the wishful steel staff fell on Duanwu Liangxing's body, his figure had already turned into an afterimage, and Duanwu Liangxing's figure had already appeared in another place. Spirit refining. Xiaohua was slightly surprised. Duanwu Liangxing proudly said, "Yes, this old man has already killed a spirit-refining great master. Xiaohua, you are not this old man's opponent, so obediently surrender. This old man will not take your life, and will only capture you back to the clan. As far as this old man knows, the clan may not punish you too severely. This Xiaohua has seen many sanctimonious hypocrites. If this Xiaohua falls into the hands of you Confucian cultivators, you will not say such things again," Xiaohua said coldly. He knew that the news of his great strength must have been reported to the Duanwu family by Duanwu Qing, and this Duanwu Liangxing must have been prepared. In this elemental formation, Duanwu Liangxing almost had the ability to teleport, and Xiaohua could not do anything with the wishful steel staff alone. Just as Xiaohua raised his hand and was about to take out the seal of overturning the sea or the Kunlun mirror, Xiaohua rolled his eyes and came up with a plan in his heart. He waved his hand and a golden light flashed out, striking towards Duanwu Liangxing's neck. At the same time, Xiaohua slapped his forehead with his hand. Rumble! Numerous pillars of righteous qi that were much thicker than the usual pillars of righteous qi came out from the origin formation. What was special was that there were 4 pillars of righteous qi that were as thick as a thumb that rushed out from the 4 monstrous righteous qi and landed on Xiaohua's body along with the other righteous qi pillars. Wang Wang! 2 deafening sword cries were produced from Xiaohua's body, and 2 green and red sword lights flew out, flying towards Duanwu Liangxing's chest. Ah! Xiaohua's soaring dragon shears was extremely fast. Once it was swung out, it immediately landed a few feet away from Duanwu Liangxing. Duanwu Liangxing cried out in alarm, and his figure disappeared. When he reappeared, his back was already drenched in cold sweat. He almost did not even have the chance to activate the elemental formation. Duanwu Liangxing was still afraid, and raised his hand. A green and bewitching light was produced from his fingers, and a verdant flying sword flashed with a dazzling brilliance, and appeared in midair. At the same time, the flying sword in Xiaohua's mouth had turned into a rainbow, and once again rushed towards Duanwu Liangxing's chest. True qi? Sword qi? Duanwu Liangxing was stunned. How do you also have Confucian true qi? However, Duanwu Liangxing was only stunned for a moment. He waved the long sword in his hand, and like a peacock spreading its tail, a fan-shaped sword light immediately appeared in midair. Each sword light was composed of tens of thousands of sword splendors, and each sword splendor had crazily rotating inscriptions. Xiaohua's flying sword fell on this sword light, and with a loud boom boom, a series of qi waves rose up, and one by one, the inscriptions were torn apart. The entire sword light was broken by more than half, but the 2 flying sword power was still blocked. -13. Chapter 3750. Duanwu Liangxing looked at Xiaohua's flying swords in disbelief. He really did not expect that Xiaohua, a half-baked Confucian cultivator, would have such strength. Furthermore, Xiaohua's flying swords were so powerful. However, Duanwu Liangxing was still in shock. He saw the brilliance of the 2 flying swords converge, and then the awe-inspiring qi within 100 feet seemed to be boiling and surging toward the green sword light. Buzz buzz buzz! The violent sword hum once again resounded through the sky. A green flying sword of several hundred feet in size appeared out of thin air. As Xiaohua's hands formed a sword seal, it carried a seemingly endless power as it slashed toward Duanwu Liangxing. Under the sword light, an area of several hundred feet was shrouded. An indescribable feeling of palpitations rose from the bottom of Duanwu Liangxing's heart, causing him to involuntarily stagnate. It was also during this stagnation that the huge sword light landed on the sword brilliance that had yet to be completely destroyed. The seemingly sharp sword brilliance was torn apart with a slash sound, and on Duanwu Liangxing's forehead, a rarely seen layer of goosebumps appeared. The reason why Duanwu Liangxing laid down the primary formation was not only because of the excessive consumption of his divine sense, but also because he had used some secret techniques when contending with the divine sense space. He had no choice but to rely on the awe-inspiring qi of the primary formation. In particular, in his plan, within this primary formation, he could rely on his divine sense to transform into nothingness, as well as the means of a Confucian cultivator to move around everywhere. Even when facing Xiaohua, who was at the upper fourth level of divine sense, he would still be in an invincible position. However, he did not expect that Xiaohua actually had the strength to transform into a sword and could also use the awe-inspiring qi of the primary formation. Therefore, when faced with the sword light that carried the power of the primary formation, the first thing he thought of was to dodge. Duanwu Liangxing's figure swayed and was about to disappear. However, at this moment, the green sword light trembled slightly. The space of several hundred feet flashed with fine sword light at the same time. The sword light emitted a piercing sword qi. Although the sword qi and sword light could not be seen by Duanwu Liangxing, there were so many sword lights that it actually produced a kind of confinement force, dragging his body down. As the sword qi permeated the awe-inspiring qi, the confinement force became stronger and stronger. Damn it! Duanwu Liangxing did not know whether to laugh or cry. This is the primary formation that I set up. I'm the one in charge of the primary formation. Why does it feel like I'm a pigeon in a magpie's nest? Boom! Duanwu Liangxing waved his sleeves and a vast wave of energy surged out from his body. It surged towards the green sword qi and sword beam. However, at this moment, King! Another sword hum was heard. After the green sword beam, another red sword beam soared into the sky. It was much sharper and more imposing than the green sword beam from before. It came crashing down on Duanwu Liangxing. When Duanwu Liangxing saw the power of these two swords, he was even more surprised. It was far more shocking than when he discovered Xiaohua's true strength. However, at the same time, he also wanted to test Xiaohua's strength. He no longer urged the vast wave of energy. Instead, with a wave of his right hand, his right arm suddenly grew longer and thicker. The green flying sword from before once again appeared. As Duanwu Liangxing urged his genuine qi and waved it out, Shua! A startling rainbow flew up even more gracefully than Xiaohua's flying sword. Not only did it cut Xiaohua's sword qi into two, it also ruthlessly slashed at the two flying swords. Kung! Seeing his own flying sword's imposing aura, Duanwu Liangxing narrowed his eyes and used the eye-clearing technique to look at Xiaohua. To Duanwu Liangxing's surprise, Xiaohua's expression changed slightly. He opened his mouth again, and his two hands formed a sword seal. Another two sword beams flew out from his mouth. One of the sword beams was golden and extremely dazzling. The other was a faint green qi and its true luster could not be seen clearly. Once these two sword beams came out, an equally powerful sword aura was generated. They turned into two giant swords and pounced on Duanwu Liangxing. Before the two flying swords even landed, the green and red flying sword from before chimed in with a sword hum. The sword qi that had been suppressed by the bamboo sword beam suddenly surged. Duanwu Liangxing raised his eyebrows and was secretly surprised. This Xiaohua, could it be that he obtained the lost sword technique of legalism? Otherwise, how could he display such an authentic Confucian sword technique? Go! Duanwu Liangxing was shocked. He activated 20% of his vital qi on the flying sword in his hand. The bamboo sword beam expanded and blocked the aura of the four flying swords. Seeing that the four flying swords were about to collide with Duanwu Liangxing's flying swords, Duanwu Liangxing opened his mouth and activated the primary formation with his left hand. Kung! Duanwu Liangxing heard two familiar sword hum. The corner of his mouth twitched involuntarily as he looked up again. To his surprise, Xiaohua's sword force this time was even more ferocious than the previous two times. Before he could even see the sword light, a monstrous sword force had already rushed toward him. Especially when two streaks of misty green sword light appeared. 6 flying swords, 6 streaks of sword chi had already merged into one. Although the green-red sword light in front had already struck Duanwu Liangxing's flying sword, the other 4 flying swords behind seemed to have reached him first. They struck at lightning speed at the same time. Ah! Duanwu Liangxing could not help but exclaim. His body expanded rapidly and wisps of sword chi leaked out. It was as if thousands of tiny flying swords were rushing out of the air. Some pierced into the void, some pierced into Duanwu Liangxing's Confucian robes, and some pierced into the billowing chi waves. Kung! Just as Duanwu Liangxing was forced to activate his vital chi to block Xiaohua's 6 flying swords, the sword intent of the bamboo flying swords decreased. Duanwu Liangxing heard 2 sword hum in his ears. How is this possible? Duanwu Liangxing was dumbfounded. Duanwu Qing, did you make a mistake? How can this Xiaohua be a Dao cultivator? He must be a disciple of the declining legalism, right? This is 8 swords in one breath. Other than legalism disciples, no one else can do this without legalism's secret technique. Furthermore, this Xiaohua's first 3 flying swords were completely condensed from vital qi. Although the remaining 6 flying swords were not condensed, they no longer had a sword form. Isn't this the legalism's sword intent? Xiaohua's 6 huge swords were destroyed by Duanwu Liangxing's flying swords. However, only the sword beams and sword intent were destroyed. The condensed sword qi was only sent flying. When Xiaohua's last 2 swords were unleashed, the 6 flying swords that were forced back by Duanwu Liangxing's surge with sword intent. 8 sword beams rushed toward Duanwu Liangxing like a sun. Duanwu Liangxing was astonished and felt that he was unstoppable. Duanwu Liangxing did not have time to activate his flying swords. He hastily slapped his forehead. Buzz! 3-colored vital chi spewed out. When the vital chi landed in the air, it immediately merged with the vital chi of the primary array. Then, Duanwu Liangxing's sub-body rapidly formed. The moment the sub-body appeared, it immediately clenched its fist. Within a radius of several hundred feet, the vital chi suddenly surged. The huge fist smashed toward the 8 sword beams. The fist's momentum was like thunder, causing the entire primary array to rumble. Clang, clang! Just as Duanwu Liangxing's sub-body was about to win, 2 more sword hums sounded. Duanwu Liangxing's body trembled. His condensed sub-body almost collapsed. Duanwu Liangxing could not help but groan in his heart. This Xiaohua, how many flying swords does he have? No, the sword hums are not right. Ouch! He has turned into a sword. Of course, the 2 sword hums were not the same as the previous one. The first hums were soft, but it was a breath of sword chi that flew out from Xiaohua's body like a meteor. The second sword hums had the intention of 10,000 swords worshipping their ancestor. It resonated with the first sword hums. Immediately after, within the space of several dozen feet to the left of Xiaohua, the noble spirit was swept away. Xiaohua's own body emitted a sword aura. That sword aura was mixed with a soaring sword will and unyielding sword aura. It transformed into a sharp flying sword that charged towards the fist of the second body. Moreover, as Xiaohua transformed into a sword, the 9 flying swords from before seemed to have transformed into a single flying sword. The strength of that flying sword was more than twice as strong as before. What a genius! Duanwu Liangxing groaned. He could not help but admire this genius. Xiaohua's cultivation is only at the upper 4th grade of essence force. To think that he has such attainments in the way of the sword. This is the first time this old man has seen someone like him. Although he is a disciple of the legalism sect and even has the cultivation of Taoism, he was captured by this old man just because of that small matter with Duanwu Qing. Who knows what kind of trouble he will cause? Shouldn't this old man make a decision? However, before Duanwu Liangxing could make a decision, Xiaohua's transformed flying sword was already close to him. Good. Seeing such power, Duanwu Liangxing's heroic spirit was ignited. He had long forgotten about Xiaohua's astonishing divine strength. He shouted, "This old man wants to see what cultivation you have. If you can withstand 3 punches from this old man will make the decision to let you go. Hearing Duanwu Liangxing's words, Xiaohua, who had already transformed into a sword, frowned. The killing intent in his heart gradually dissipated. He thought to himself, "Oh? As the saying goes, there are all kinds of birds in the forest. Why does this Duanwu Liangxing's words sound more and more like the words of a human? Completely different from Duanwu Qing? Of course, I cannot rule out the possibility that this person is extremely scheming and wants to tempt me with his words. However, even so, I cannot rashly kill him at this moment. Not to mention the huge price I have to pay to kill him. If I kill him, won't the Duanwu family know about my strength? If I kill him, they will send over cultivators even more powerful than Duanwu Liangxing. Since that is the case, why don't I keep Duanwu Liangxing alive and use him as a cover for myself? Yes, I will do that. I will use this to trick the Duanwu family." Thinking of this, Xiaohua's sword did not stop moving. He coldly said, "What a big talk. Eat my sword first." Seeing that Xiaohua's sword was unparalleled, Duanwu Liangxing's body waved his hands. His arms surged with a jade-green color. His fists also flashed with a jade-green sword light. Even the upper body of his body had turned into jade-green. -13. Chapter 3751. Boom! The 9 stars soaring sun flying sword pierced right in front of Duanwu Liangxing. A violent sword chi rushed into his body. Duanwu Liangxing's eyes were filled with a kind of fanaticism. His entire body shook violently like a roly-poly toy. Immediately after, there was a loud roar. Xiaohua's sword body fell. Woo! Duanwu Liangxing's huge body fell several dozen feet. At the same time, Duanwu Liangxing let out an angry roar. Break! His sword-like arms blossomed with an extremely resplendent light. Duanwu Liangxing had actually used 70% of his qi to strike Xiaohua's sword. Hiss! Although Duanwu Liangxing's body was trembling and had fallen several hundred feet, he was still standing majestically. When he looked at Xiaohua's sword form, he was sent flying with a loud bang. However, Xiaohua's body was still in the form of a flying sword without any changes. Seeing this, Duanwu Liangxing could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. However, just at this time, Xiaohua's figure that was sent flying by the sword suddenly flashed with the color of lightning. Rumble! Several thunderbolts were produced from the sword. Immediately after, the 9 stars soaring sun flying swords were also attracted by these thunderbolts. One after the other, one after the other, one after the other. By the time Duanwu Liangxing noticed, Xiaohua's sword body and the 9 flying swords had already turned into a shadow in the sky. Oh, not good! Seeing Xiaohua escape from his sight in an instant, Duanwu Liangxing was stunned at first, then suddenly realized. This little guy actually wanted to escape from the beginning. It turns out that he did not intend to fight with this old man. Duanwu Liangxing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He hurriedly waved his body and several streams of Aoran Qi rushed into the void like pearls. The moment the Aoran Qi disappeared, the entire primary array shook violently. The 4 strange Aoran Qi figures at the 4 corners of the primary array let out a series of chanting sounds. One after another, Aoran Qi pillars rushed out from the figures and shot towards the place where Xiaohua had disappeared to. Looking at Xiaohua again, he turned into a sword and pierced into a corner of the origin formation with the sharpness of the 9 stars transit of the sun. However, the space was extremely distorted and countless inscriptions overflowed from the distorted space, flashing crazily. There was even a Haoran Qi pillar that landed on the distorted space, trying to repair the torn gap. Open! Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. His entire figure slightly separated from the sword and immediately took out the Kunlun mirror. Where his transcendence energy was activated, a beam of light rushed to the place where the space was torn apart. Kacha! A crisp sound rang out. The entire primordial formation was torn apart by a crack of several feet. Go! Xiaohua didn't stop at all. His transformed sword once again activated the lightning escape. Together with his flying sword, he pierced through the gap and disappeared. Boom! The moment Xiaohua disappeared, a big hand reached out in a flash. Unfortunately, it only caught a few streaks of lightning in the hand and did not even touch the flying sword body. Damn it! Duanwu Liangxing's sub-body had teleported to the crack. He looked at the spot where Xiaohua had disappeared and the crack was rapidly shrinking. He could not help but curse. The huge sub-body opened its mouth and a tricolored brilliance landed on the four objects. Boom! The entire space was shaking. The pillar of great qi, along with some colorful clouds, quickly fell into the objects. The primary formation was retracted and the true appearance of the maze was revealed. This was a rather large space. There were many waves of dermic power in the surroundings. Under the waves of dermic power, there were many forks in the space. In one of the forks, there was the sound of thunder and lightning. Damn it, you dared to play this trick with me! Fine, I'll play with you! I don't believe that I can't capture you! Duanwu Liangxing was flustered and exasperated. In his heart, on one hand, Xiaohua might be a junior. He wanted to give him face and let Xiaohua go, but Xiaohua did not appreciate it, and escaped when he was caught off guard. On the other hand, Xiaohua was only a 4th-grade elemental energy cultivator while he was a 5th-grade elemental energy cultivator. He had already lost face by dealing with Xiaohua. Now that he let Xiaohua escape, he really did not know how to explain it. Perhaps Duanwu Liangxing's current mood was turning into anger out of humiliation. However, Duanwu Liangxing did not expect that the real ending was not what he had imagined. It was his words just now, those words that came from the bottom of his heart, that really saved his life. Not only did Duanwu Liangxing's pressure not redeem his face, but it also pushed him into the abyss of death. Xiaohua's thunder escape was indeed fast, but the sound it made was also loud. Although there were many forks in the maze, Duanwu Liangxing could easily chase after Xiaohua. Moreover, because there were so many forks, the speed of the thunder escape was gradually limited. When Xiaohua realized that he had changed to the wind escape, this wind escape was obviously not as fast as the thunder escape. Moreover, Duanwu Liangxing was also proficient in flying. Although he was unable to catch up with Xiaohua, he was still unable to shake him off. After flying for an hour, Duanwu Liangxing suddenly realized that Xiaohua had lost his way. Xiaohua had already flown through the same forks more than once. The characteristics of these forks were very obvious. Duanwu Liangxing only needed to take a glance to distinguish them. Moreover, Xiaohua had actually rushed through them several times. Seeing this, Duanwu Liangxing's eyes turned and a plan came to his mind. He secretly laid down an origin formation at the side of several forks where Xiaohua would easily appear. Although he could only lay down a part of them each time, he could not stop Xiaohua from flying so many times. Duanwu Liangxing was so successful that even he himself did not dare to believe it. However, when he saw Xiaohua once again rush through a simple origin formation that he had laid down, Duanwu Liangxing opened his mouth and a mouthful of true energy fell into the void. Boom! A layer of clouds similar to the twilight emerged from the forks. Waves of awe-inspiring qi mixed with inscriptions blocked Xiaohua's path. Why is there an origin formation in the cloudy mountain maze? When Xiaohua saw the origin formation appear, he was first shocked. When he realized that the awe-inspiring qi in the void came from behind him, he was even more shocked. This old thing, how could he lay down an origin formation in front of me? Just as this thought appeared, Xiaohua's Kunlun mirror appeared again. Boom! Wherever the Kunlun mirror's light beam passed, layers of inscriptions melted. The origin formation that Duanwu Liangxing had painstakingly laid down earlier was unable to stop Xiaohua. Now, how could a simple defensive formation that was hastily laid down be a match for the Kunlun mirror? Xiaohua's figure rushed through the origin formation. His eyes slightly narrowed, and the corners of his mouth curled into a mischievous smile. With a wave of his hand, dozens of fire talismans immediately flew to the surroundings of the secret passage. Then, Xiaohua laid down another restriction in the secret passage and rushed into the distance again. This little guy's cultivation is ordinary, but his ability to escape is extraordinary. Seeing this broken origin formation, Although Duanwu Liangxing didn't think that a simple origin formation would be able to trap Xiaohua, he merely wanted to use the origin formation to delay for a while. He couldn't help but smile bitterly to himself. However, he didn't remove the origin formation because he knew that if nothing unexpected happened, Xiaohua would return to this place soon. Unfortunately, just as he rushed through the origin formation, he felt an obscure transcendence energy appear. Duanwu Liangxing was slightly startled. He knew that he had touched some kind of restriction. He hurriedly urged his figure to retreat. Rumble! Xiaohua's most adept fire talisman star formation had already rushed towards Duanwu Liangxing. Duanwu Liangxing waved his hand, and a tsunami-like awe-inspiring qi immediately wrapped around these exploding fire talismans. However, not only was this exploding energy powerful, it was also tricky. It was almost all-pervasive. As long as Duanwu Liangxing's defense was the slightest bit weak, that energy would immediately drill into it. In particular, this secret passage had the restriction of the Misty Mountain Maze formation. When that wave of qi rushed into the restriction still had the power to counterattack. It was as if Duanwu Liangxing had touched the restriction of the Misty Mountain Maze formation. For a moment, Duanwu Liangxing was in a very sorry state. Even his Confucian attire was somewhat tattered. When he flew out from the smoke with his face covered in dust, Xiaohua had already fled far away. Xiaohua! Duanwu Liangxing let out a long shout. The clouds under his feet actually gave birth to sword light. If this old man doesn't capture you today, this old man's surname isn't Duanwu. Unfortunately, how could Xiaohua hear him? Just as Xiaohua heard the faint sound of an explosion, a bright light flashed in his mind. He instantly understood how Duanwu Liangxing had laid down the origin formation. Seeing that another fork in the road had appeared, he was just about to rush into one of them. Then, he immediately stopped, picked the one at the edge, and flew in. Furthermore, in order to create a diversion, Xiaohua had even specially used the Devil Realm's concealment technique. It's just that Xiaohua's hundreds of plans, after he had flown for the time it took to eat a meal, his figure had just turned out from a secret passage, and before he could recognize the other forks, he saw layer after layer of inscriptions covering the sky and covering the earth like grasshoppers, all of a sudden enveloping Xiaohua within. As Xiaohua's figure was blocked, layers of vast qi waves rushed out from the rock walls, drowning Xiaohua. A kind of vast power tightly shackled Xiaohua. Duanwu Liangxing! Xiaohua was flustered and exasperated. He shouted loudly. This Xiao only feels that you are a straightforward person, different from Duanwu Qing's narrow-mindedness. This is why this Xiao doesn't want to meet you in a life-and-death battle. Since you are forcing me step by step, this Xiao will make you fearful at every step. Today, you will die here. As he spoke, the top of Xiaohua's head spouted out a tricolored cloud. An abundant power pushed away the vast qi that was binding Xiaohua. Xiaohua's figure flashed with a dark golden brilliance, and his transcendence golden body was displayed. Woo! Just as Xiaohua's tricolored true qi rushed out, the entire origin formation emitted a strange sound. All the noble qi crazily trembled, and along with the trembling, a very small wind sound was born. Soon after, layers upon layers of noble qi began to rotate, and a huge rotating passage was born in front of Xiaohua. This passage was perfectly straight, and it seemed to lead to the inside of the rock walls. It also seemed to be the end of the secret passage. No, this isn't Duanwu Old Ghost's origin formation. Doubts arose in Xiaohua's heart, but he didn't have time to think too much. The revolving passage had a force that he couldn't resist pushing him forward. Moreover, in the distance, he felt an extremely familiar feeling. -13. Chapter 3752. Xiaohua wanted to activate the lightning escape technique, but unfortunately, he couldn't activate the magic power in his meridians. His nascent soul was also imprisoned in his lower dantian. Only the true qi in his middle dantian was abnormally lively. This is really an origin array, Xiaohua understood. However, this wasn't set up by Duanwu Liangxing. It should be the origin array set up by Senior Tsenglongzi. Thinking that this was an origin array set up by Tsenglongzi and the bone tempering technique he obtained from the stone wall, Xiaohua couldn't help but look forward to the familiar feeling in the distance. In his heart, he secretly pondered what this familiar feeling was. Xiaohua thought of many possibilities, but when he arrived at this misty space and saw countless dark green clouds condensed into mountains, trees, beasts, and city walls, he couldn't help but cry out in surprise. In the middle of the clouds he saw a turtle shell that looked like the noon sun embedded in it. The turtle shell emitted a dark green color, and a vigorous aura filled the entire space. All the creatures condensed from clouds and mist seemed to be worshipping this brilliance. Turtle shell? Heaven's heart! Xiaohua groaned and couldn't help but open his mouth. This turtle shell was actually hidden here. Looking at the brilliance in clouds, there must be a heaven's heart inside. Senior Tsenglongzi's divine ability is so great, he actually hid the heaven's heart of a Confucian cultivator in this misty mountain maze formation. No wonder Confucian cultivators couldn't find the heaven's heart in the hidden Immortal continent. Even Xian, a disciple of a Confucian family, only had half a heaven's heart. No wonder the misty mountain maze formation's protection is so tight. If it wasn't for this maze formation, how could it protect the heaven's heart for thousands of years? If I didn't first activate the true chi in my chest and conceal the heaven's heart's aura, I'm afraid this origin array might not have brought me here. With the thought, Xiaohua slapped the top of his head, and the tricolored heart of heaven rushed out of his dantian along with his jin qi. The tricolored brilliance fell on the spatial clouds, and with the dark green color, it actually became a multicolored brilliance. Even though the Wanxiang in this space was condensed from clouds, it looked extremely similar to an ordinary object. When he looked at the tricolor heaven's heart again, it was attracted by the aura of the tortoise shell. It turned into a stream and landed near the tortoise shell, surrounding it. Fellow Taoists! Quickly let me out! At this moment, the scholarly cultivator Xiaohua's voice trembled slightly, and he said anxiously, I seem to have understood a little. That's right, this really is the essence of Confucian cultivation. Xiaohua was also overjoyed. He hurriedly patted his chest with his hand. Confucian cultivator Xiaohua charged into the space with his sword light. His tricolored body immediately produced a powerful suction force. Wind swirled and clouds surged. The objects formed by the surrounding clouds were all shattered and then rushed into Confucian cultivator Xiaohua's body. Swish, swish, swish. There was a soft sound like falling leaves. Confucian cultivator Xiaohua's body couldn't help but swell. When Xiaohua grew to 100 meters tall, he opened his mouth and a stream of qi fell on the tortoise shell and the tricolor heaven's heart. 4 rays of light rushed into them. The light around Confucian cultivator Xiaohua's body flashed rapidly. His body slowly shrank until it was the same size as Xiaohua. If it weren't for some differences in skin that were difficult to distinguish, this Confucian cultivator Xiaohua would be almost exactly the same as Xiaohua. Although Confucian cultivator Xiaohua shrank, he didn't open his eyes. The aura of the tortoise shell didn't disappear because it entered Xiaohua's body. Instead, because of the tricolor heaven's heart, this aura became even denser and gradually filled the entire space. Namo Maitreya Buddha! Xiaohua very untimely chanted the name of Buddha, and his body slowly retreated to the side. At this time, Confucian cultivator Xiaohua replaced Xiaohua. At this time, Confucian cultivator Xiaohua didn't have the appearance of standing out like before. He also didn't have the sword qi that could pierce the sky. All of the sword shapes had disappeared, and only a scholarly robe that seemed to be condensed from the pages of a book was on his body. Although there were still armor inscriptions flashing in his eyes, the inscriptions had a kind of upright and plain-spoken aura that was far stronger than that of an ordinary scholarly cultivator. A slender sword was casually hanging from Xiaohua's waist. There was a scabbard on the sword, and the scabbard was still in the shape of a scroll. Faintly, an incomparably sharp sword qi would seep out from the gaps between the scabbard. The 8 flying swords that formed Confucian cultivator Xiaohua had all condensed into one. The originally very obvious heart-shaped sword intent was now also hidden in Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's body. The sharp edge was no longer suitable for the mediocre Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua, and could no longer show the mature Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua raised his hands, and his scholarly robe fluttered in the wind. The clouds and mist in the entire space seemed to spread through the entire space with Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's perception, and the clouds and mist in the entire space began to slowly change under Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's perception. At first, the transformation was extremely slow, as if it was stagnant. The entire space was deathly still. After an unknown period of time, perhaps a gust of wind blew, and a grass seed moved. This grass seed broke out of the ground and grew into a blade of grass. Then, thousands upon thousands of grass seeds moved, and thousands upon thousands of blades of grass grew out of the ground. A blade of grass, a tree, a mountain, a city, a chicken, a dog, a cow, a person, a speck of dust, a ray of light, a star, a world. There were more and more things in the entire space, and the changes became faster and faster. In the end, all things turned into flowing lights that flashed around Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua. After an unknown amount of time, all the flowing lights suddenly stopped. Then, with a boom, a burst of silent rumbling sounds, and the entire space was fragmented and destroyed. All things turned into a rotating cloud and mist. This rotating cloud and mist drew a strange arc in the air and fell on top of Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's head. Although Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua still hadn't opened his eyes, the cloud and mist fell down and merged into Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's body without any resistance. The cloud and mist was like the finishing touch. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's body gradually emitted a multicolored light from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. When an indescribable liveliness and vitality appeared in Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's eyes, a scroll slowly unfolded in a certain place in the space, and spread to Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's feet. "Congratulations, fellow immortal!" Xiao Hua flew to Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's expression and cupped his hands with a smile. A solemn expression appeared on Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's face. He returned the greeting and said, "Congratulations, congratulations." However, it seems that fellow immortal still hasn't completely grasped the true essence of Confucian cultivation. There are still many questions that you don't understand. Xiao Hua's tone changed as he asked. "Fellow immortal!" Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's face vividly showed bitterness. "This is the true essence of cultivation that countless Confucian cultivators diligently seek. You and I came from a Taoist sect. Now that we have the fortune of being able to peek into the mysteries of heaven, what are you still not satisfied with? Right now, you and I have 4 of the 5 heavenly hearts. When we find the last heavenly heart, you and I will be able to gather the 5 energies and truly understand the secret of Confucian cultivation. Even if we gather all 5 heavenly hearts, I fear that it will still be difficult to find the true secret." Xiao Hua shook his head. If it was only the gathering of the 5 heavenly hearts, how could the 5 heavenly hearts fall apart? Wouldn't Confucian cultivators do everything possible to protect these 5 heavenly hearts? Who knows? Let's wait until we find the last heavenly heart. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua looked at the scroll at his feet and said with a smile, "We should leave this ancient maze as soon as possible. If Confucian cultivators find out that the heavenly heart is inside the misty mountain maze, I fear that the Immortal Palace will send immortal soldiers and immortal generals to tear this misty mountain maze apart from the inside out. All right, fellow immortal, please return to your position." Xiao Hua patted the top of his head. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's figure turned into 3-colored true energy and disappeared inside. Immediately after, Xiao Hua took the soaring dragon shears inside his Taoist robe and stepped on the scroll. His whole body followed the rotation of the scroll and flew forward. At this moment, Xiao Hua was really looking forward to it. The 2 maze formations gave him endless benefits. He couldn't imagine what kind of treasures he would be able to obtain in Tsang Lingzi's immortal cave. Moreover, he finally understood why Zhai Xingzi and Zhang Daoran were willing to risk their lives to break into this great formation. Because the greater the risk, the greater the reward. This trip to Sanglangzi's immortal cave was more rewarding than all of Xiaohua's adventures. However, Xiaohua, who had been blinded by happiness, still thought too simply. Of course, in this immortal cave of Senior Dijie, everything was a treasure for the cultivators of the Tao sect, and they were rarely seen. But in fact, how could things that were suitable for cultivation and use be so easy to obtain? For example, the few things that Xiaohua had obtained. The bone-tempering technique of the dragon clan, the turtle shell that hid the heavenly heart, the spiritual intelligence that was used to cultivate the scattered nascent soul, the escape technique of the 5 elements, and the pill concoction method. Which of these 4 things could be used by ordinary cultivators? Cultivating the bone-tempering technique of the dragon clan? Not to mention that human cultivators couldn't cultivate it. Even if they did, they would end up with their bones broken and their flesh torn apart. As for the turtle shell, even G-Man of Meng Mountain couldn't figure out its secrets. How could ordinary Confucian cultivators and Taoist cultivators find anything strange about it? Compared to the turtle shell, the spiritual intelligence was even rarer. If Xiaohua didn't have the opportunity to obtain Mo Yuntong from Xian Songzi, and if Xiaohua didn't have the memories of Huang Yi and the others, how could he have obtained them? If that was the case, it was all thanks to Sanglangzi for collecting so many things, and even more thanks to Xiaohua, who was both a Confucian cultivator and a Buddhist cultivator, that he was able to turn these useless things into treasures. In fact, when it came to the real Taoist cultivation technique, Sanglangzi's understanding of cultivation, Xiaohua didn't even touch the edge of it. Suppressing his excited little heart, Xiaohua flew along with the scroll, and his figure slowly disappeared. However, when Xiaohua flew out from the stone wall and saw everything in front of him, he couldn't help but cry out. Are you kidding me? Why did I return to the original immortal cave? That's right. Once again, what Xiaohua didn't expect was that although the stone wall he flew out from was not the previous one, the immortal cave he fell into was still the same one. The platform where Xiaohua took away the jade table was also empty. The jade wave that Xiaohua took away from the spiritual intelligence was also empty. The entire immortal cave was empty, just like when Xiaohua left. -13. Chapter 3753. It looks like I've taken the wrong path again. Xiaohua's gaze swept across the cave and landed on the 4 different entrances. He didn't panic, as if it would be strange if he didn't go the wrong way. However, he thought to himself, if I want to find the real cave, I'm afraid I have to choose another entrance. After thinking for a bit, Xiaohua took out the Kunlun mirror and sent Fairy Xiangfeng out. Fairy Xiangfeng's face still had a sad expression. She didn't look anywhere else but stared at Xiaohua as if there was still hatred in her heart. Cough, cough. Xiaohua coughed twice and said with a smile, Fairy Xiangfeng, although this Xiao killed Reverend Xiangtian, but now I have saved you several times. In terms of gratitude and grudges, you and I are even. Just like what I said in the spirit sense space, you don't have to thank me. I don't expect you to let go of your hatred in such a short time. However, what I want to tell you is that there is a limit to my tolerance. I can tolerate it once, but I can't tolerate it 3 times. If you still can't let it go in the end and want to attack me, then I definitely won't be merciful. If that's the case, why did you save me? Fairy Xiangfeng's expression didn't change as she asked. AI, it's not easy for a person to live. Even ants struggle to live. Fairy has cultivated for thousands of years. Why do you want to die for some things that you can't cross? Xiaohua knew that Fairy Xiangfeng's impulse to kill herself had passed, and she might not kill herself. He sighed and said, The reason why we cultivators are cultivators is to separate ourselves from love and go against the heavens. Fairy's past was because you were too involved in the love of the world. That's why you're in this situation now. Fairy should think about the essence of cultivation and comprehend what you've gained from the Misty Mountain Maze formation. Fairy Xiangfeng sighed softly. Magic power surged around her body, and her figure and face changed slightly. Soon, she returned to her female form. Fairy Xiang Feng raised her eyes and looked around. Shock flashed in her eyes. After a while, she looked at Xiao Hua and said, "What Taoist Xiao said makes sense. However, my mind is in a mess right now and I might not be able to listen." This time, I gained a lot from Senior Tsung Langzi's cave. Not only did I gain some enlightenment, but I also obtained the spirit tool on the jade table. If what you said is true, I might be able to reach the leaving aperture stage if I cultivate in peace. However, it's easier said than done. Since you know how to do it, then do it. It's better than thinking about the past. Xiao Hua could only comfort him. Fairy Xiang Feng sighed and said, "Sigh, if only there was unruffled water in this world, how great would that be?" Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat, but when he thought about Jai Xingzi and Gusichiodi, he knew that the forgotten emotions water might not be useful. But then, Xiao Hua smiled and said, "To be honest, Fairy, this Xiao knows of a place called Heartbreak Mountain. It has the forgotten emotions water that you are thinking of. Ah? Is that true?" Fairy Xiang Feng's face was filled with disbelief. After Xiao Hua told her the location of Heartbreak Mountain, Fairy Xiang Feng nodded as if there was hope. "Thank you, Taoist Xiao. Once I leave this place, I will immediately go to Heartbreak Mountain." "All right." Xiao Hua smiled faintly, his heart at ease. Since the poor Fairy Xiang Feng had a glimmer of hope, even if this glimmer of hope was shattered, who knows how many years later, even if Fairy Xiang Feng were to think about it again, she might not have the will to die now, right? Since she had a goal, Fairy Xiang Feng looked around and said with a smile, "Taoist Xiao, you are indeed lost. We should have already entered this place before, right?" "Indeed." Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. "This Xiao knows that I don't have the ability to break the maze, so I let you out and let you decide. Isn't it enough to go to the other 3 passages? There has to be an exit." Fairy Xiang Feng asked with some surprise. "You don't need me to remind you of this, do you?" "Perhaps." Xiao Hua shook his head. "This Xiao is not sure myself, so I asked you, and the other disciples to come out and let them decide for themselves." With that, Xiao Hua let Fu Jiwen and Xue Ping out. Everyone saw that they were still in the cave, but the others were gone, and there was an additional nascent soul female cultivator. They were all astonished. Xue Ping and the rest even felt that they had not left the cave. However, they did not dare to ask too much, and went forward to greet Fairy Xiang Feng. Fairy Xiang Feng waved her hand slightly, not paying much attention to them. When Xiao Hua finished explaining the ins and outs of the matter, everyone understood. Xue Ping smiled and said, "Since that is the case, Senior can choose another passage. We have no objections." "Hee, it's different." Xiao Hua smiled slightly, and his eyes swept across the stone wall that he had just flown down. Seeing that there was no movement, he knew that Duanwu Liangxing had not caught up. He said, "This Zhao's choice is different from everyone's, so I asked Fairy Xiang Feng to bring everyone to find their own opportunities." "Oh? Taoist Xiao, you mean?" Fairy Xiang Feng frowned. "You won't choose the passage with us?" "Yes, that's right." Xiao Hua's gaze turned to the stone wall again, and he smiled bitterly. "This Xiao has some difficulties that I cannot say here. Now that time is of the essence, I think you should choose a passage and bring these disciples in." Others might not be able to sense Xiao Hua's uneasiness, but how could Fairy Xiang Feng not see it? She already knew that after she entered the Kunlun mirror, Xiao Hua would definitely encounter something. She probed, "Taoist Xiao, don't you need my help? Do you still have any strength left?" Xiao Hua asked back. "Sigh, all right." Fairy Xiang Feng was helpless, and similarly looked at the stone wall that Xiao Hua had looked at. She stood up and came to a passage that looked like a water droplet, and said, "This old one will choose this. If any disciple wishes to follow, then come over. However, this old one cannot guarantee your safety like Taoist Xiao." "Why not?" Xue Ping hesitated slightly and said, "We wait here for other seniors and fellow Taoists who have gone the wrong way. It's best not to." Xiao Hua shook his head slightly. He did not wish to implicate these cultivators because of his grudge with the Duanwu family, and similarly, he did not wish for them to see his fight with the Duanmu family. Yes. Although Xiaohua's words were tactful, his tone was very certain. Xue Ping and the rest saw that there was no room for doubt, and did not dare to disobey, and walked behind Fairy Xiangfeng. This old one will leave now. Fairy Xiangfeng nodded towards Xiaohua, and brought Xue Ping and the rest into the passage. Seeing that everyone had left, Fu Jiwen respectfully asked, Master, what kind of strong enemy did you encounter? To actually hide like this, and let Fairy Xiangfeng bring fellow Taoist Xue Ping and the rest into the passage? Damn it! Xiaohua scratched his head, and cursed. It's our old enemy. Duanmu Qin? Fu Jiwen immediately understood, and an apologetic expression appeared on his face. He bowed and said, This disciple has made things difficult for Master. He, there's no need for that. Xiaohua waved his hand, and said with a smile, Since you are this old one's disciple, your matter is naturally this old one's matter. Moreover, that person from the Duanmu family might not be this old one's match. This old one just did not want to bother with him. Oh? Fu Jiwen smiled. Since Master is not afraid of the people from the Duanmu family, why did you let these disciples leave? If Fairy Xiangfeng was by the side, she would be of help no matter what. Xiaohua laughed coldly. Fairy Xiangfeng is Yunmingzi. During the Jade Pavilion banquet, I killed her lover, Taoist Xiang Tian. Do you think I can be at ease with her by my side? See. Xiaohua's words immediately woke Fu Jiwen up. There was no need for Xiaohua to explain anything else. Fu Jiwen already understood the strangeness of the matter. Thinking of the previous Fairy Su Ming, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. There's also Xue Ping. Xiaohua's gaze didn't leave the stone wall that he just landed on, and at the same time he was secretly on guard. He said, Master is not afraid of the people from the Duanmu family, but Master can't guarantee that nothing will happen to me. The person who is coming is a mid-tier 5th grade Essence Force Grandmaster. If Master were to slip up and get captured, or if some other accident happens, wouldn't Master be holding him back? It's better not to involve others with this kind of karma. SSS. Fu Jiwen sucked in another breath as if he had a toothache. He had already made it clear that he wouldn't bring Xue Ping and the rest to risk their lives, but when he heard that the person who came was a 5th grade Essence Force, how could he not be surprised? However, you are Master's disciple. Even if it's a mountain of swords or a sea of fire, you have to follow Master through water and tread on fire. Xiaohua said with a smile. This is a disciple's duty. Fu Jiwen replied respectfully. All right. Xiaohua clapped his hands and took out the soul extermination vital light. He looked at it proudly and said, It's a pity that this treasure has been refined for too short a time and has yet to reach the level of a spiritual tool. Otherwise, why would I be afraid of a 5th grade Essence Force Confucian cultivator? Then what should I do? Fu Jiwen asked softly. You are a Confucian cultivator. This Duanmu Liangxing from the Duanmu family seems to be a straightforward person. He doesn't know who you are, so he might not make things difficult for you. Xiaohua smiled mysteriously. If something happens to Master, you can still help Master, right? Yes, disciple understands. Fu Jiwen blinked his eyes and gave an extremely sinister laugh. He didn't have anything else, but if the heaven punishment prison crystal came out at the crucial moment, the lightning on it would probably make Duanmu Liangxing suffer the consequences, right? However, Xiaohua held the soul extermination vital light and waited for a long time. Not to mention that there was no movement from the stone wall, even the other cultivators did not turn around. Damn it, could it be that that guy also got some dog's hit luck? What kind of opportunity did he encounter? Xiaohua was a little irritated. Fu Jiwen, who was at the side, was calm and reminded in a low voice, Master, the heaven punishment prison crystal's lightning punishment seems to be coming again. Yes, let's wait a little longer. Xiaohua waved his hand. His eyes probed the interior of the cave. When his eyes once again landed on the brown bear-like cave entrance, his eyes rotated as he asked, Fu Jiwen, do you still remember the path that we took earlier? 13. Chapter 37:54. Yes, this disciple remembers. Fu Jiwen was indeed smart. He understood Xiao Hua's intentions and replied sinisterly. Master, are you planning to follow his escape route? He, if you want to, hurry up. Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand and withdrew the soul execution yuan light. He shouted. When he returns, naturally, no, even if he returns, he won't wait here. He will definitely find another passage. We will definitely be safe if we take the original passage. But the dangers we encountered on the way. Fu Jiwen probed in a low voice. Master, are you still confident? Master has many methods. Xiao Hua proudly said. You just have to wait and see. All right, Master, please. Fu Jiwen raised his hand. Although Xiao Hua didn't recognize the way, he had already memorized the dangers of the secret passage. He wasn't afraid of the divine sense space. Not to mention the jade blood core transformation secret technique, his Buddhist awareness and soul awareness were more than enough. Xiao Hua walked to the entrance of the cave and looked at the stone wall one last time. There was still no movement. He wanted to set up some traps here, but he was afraid that Zhai Xingzi and the others would encounter them when they returned. He simply didn't think too much about it, and walked into the cave with Fu Jiwen with his head held high. However, he had never expected that when Xiao Hua stepped into the cave, he would be stunned in an instant. He had a dumbstruck expression. Even Fu Jiwen, who accompanied Xiao Hua in, had the same expression. Because in front of them wasn't the secret passage they entered before, but rather a rather large cave. This cave was similar to an ordinary cave. It was about 100 zhang in size. There were stone tables and chairs inside, as well as some strange carvings. What was special was that there was a cloud bed at the head of the cave. On top of the cloud bed was a small jade table. Motherfucker! Xiao Hua slapped his own forehead, and said regretfully as if he had been enlightened. Master should have thought of this long ago. How could Master have chosen the wrong path? I have already passed Senior Tsung Langzi's test twice. After this cave is naturally the inner cave. Yes, Master is right. Fu Jiwen secretly laughed in his heart. He understood very well that Xiao Hua couldn't possibly think this way. In fact, no one could possibly think this way. Anyone who reached the outer layer of the abode would choose another path to continue searching for the inner layer of the abode. Xiao Hua only came to the inner layer of the abode by accident because he wanted to avoid his enemies. However, he didn't know how many chances there were to enter the inner layer of the abode. If there was only one chance, Zhai Xingzi, Zhang Daoran, Sun Kong Shangren and the others probably wouldn't be able to enter again. Of course, Fu Jiwen also knew that since Tsung Langzi had set up such a trap here, it was highly likely that no one else would be able to enter. It seemed that Xiao Hua had also thought of this. Looking at the smile on Fu Jiwen's face, Xiao Hua couldn't help but raise his head and laugh. Ha ha ha, my disciple, take your time to search. In the future, within this cave, even if other people come, they won't be able to obtain anything. Ha ha, Master is right. Fu Jiwen also laughed. Senior Tsung Langzi's cave abode is really too dangerous. Since I was able to come here with Master, I will definitely get back what we have sacrificed. Rest assured, Master. That's Master's good disciple. Xiao Hua laughed and released his Buddhist sense. However, what puzzled Xiao Hua was that within the abode, his Buddhist sense was actually imprisoned. My disciple, what about your eye-clearing technique and divine sense technique? Xiao Hua turned around and asked. Fu Jiwen honestly replied. Master, I can't use them. Strange. Xiao Hua pinched his chin and was very puzzled. What does Senior Tsung Langzi mean? Why does he have to imprison his divine sense in his own cave abode? Master, it should be that Senior Tsung Langzi set up the restriction after he left. Fu Jiwen reminded. That's not what I meant. Xiao Hua frowned and said, What I meant was, what does Senior Tsung Langzi want to do? In the secret passage and the outer layer of the abode, it was to test our strength. Does he still need to do it here? It shouldn't be necessary, right? Fu Jiwen looked around and said tentatively, "Unless Senior Tsang Lungzi has another cave abode. It doesn't seem like there's another one." Xiaohua shook his head slightly. "There's already a cloud bed here." "Oh, where are the two entrances?" "If I'm not mistaken, there should be a pill room, a herb garden, or a place for refining tools. There shouldn't be another cave abode." At this point, Xiaohua came back to his senses and patted his head. "Look at Master, what am I thinking? Go quickly. You go that way and Master will go this way. See if there's anything in the cave abode and take it all." "Yes, disciple understands. Disciple will not leave behind even a single jade eye." Fu Jiwen obediently replied. "And go." Xiaohua waved his hand and released his soul consciousness to explore the entire cave abode. Although Tseng Longzi was a tribulation-passing cultivator with endless means, he still couldn't completely seal off his soul consciousness. This cave abode was only 100 feet in size. Xiaohua's soul consciousness swept through it and saw everything clearly. After Xiaohua looked around, he felt a little disappointed. The entire cave abode was divided into 3 parts. The outer layer was near the stone wall. There were some jade shelves, but there were few things on them. Not only were there no ink cloud eyes that Xiaohua expected, there wasn't even a jade bottle. On the other hand, there were 1 or 2 scattered magic tools on Fu Jiwen's side, but they didn't seem to be of excellent quality. The middle part was filled with jade chairs and other things. There were also some jade tables, which seemed to be used to entertain guests. There were also some jade plates and jade plates on them. However, these jade plates and jade plates were empty. Not to mention spirit fruits, there wasn't even a fruit pit. The remaining part was naturally where the cloud bed was. The cloud bed seemed to be a part of the stone wall. From afar, it looked like a protruding part of the stone wall. There was a jade table on top of it, and on top of it was a small jade rui. It seemed to be placed very casually. Seeing this, Xiaohua suddenly lost interest. He curled his lips and secretly cursed. "Senior Tsang Longzi, you're too stingy, aren't you? It wasn't easy for this junior to come here. Why didn't you leave behind any benefits? Could it be that you put all the good things in the cave abode in the maze to test the juniors?" Although Xiaohua complained, he also understood that he had gained a lot through the 2 layers of maze. Zhang Daoran, Sinkong Shengren, Jai Xingzi, Gusichiodi, Gong Shuisin, and even Fairy Xiang Feng and Duanwu Liangxing must have gained something. Since everyone had gained something, then the treasures in Tsang Lungzi's cave abode were actually enough. It didn't matter whether Tsang Lungzi put things in the inner layer of the cave abode or not. This Xiao understands." Xiaohua looked around the entire Immortal's cave and had an idea in his heart. He said loudly, "Disciple, don't look around here. Quickly go. There are several magic tools on that jade shelf. Take them and go directly to the entrance. Tsang Longzi put all the things in the cave abode in the maze." "Yes, this disciple understands." Fu Jiwen hurriedly nodded and rushed to the jade shelves Xiaohua pointed at. Xiaohua didn't pay any attention to the things in the cave abode and went straight to the entrance on the cloud bed. There weren't any restrictions on the entrance. It was just a long passage. Xiaohua's soul sense didn't find anything special. But when his soul sense came to the passage, Xiaohua's face was full of excitement. "Haha, as expected." Xiaohua quickened his pace. "Senior Tseng Longzi didn't put anything in the inner layer of the cave abode. But there are good things in his pill room. Or maybe Senior Tseng Longzi didn't think of these things as good things." Xiaohua didn't wait until he reached the exit of the passage. He impatiently used his soul sense to scan the pill room. When he entered the pill room, he didn't hesitate to walk to the stone wall of the pill room. He saw that the stone wall was filled with irregular grids. Most of them were empty. Only about 30% of the grids were filled with jade bottles. But when Xiaohua saw the jade bottles, he was slightly stunned. Because there were some words written randomly on the jade bottles. They were of different sizes. What surprised Xiaohua was that these words were actually very similar to the words of the Dawn Rain continent. Xiaohua could almost understand what kind of pills were inside at a glance. It wasn't until now that Xiaohua realized that the words used in Senior Tsenglengzi's cave abode were the words of the Dawn Rain continent. Thinking of this, Xiaohua hurriedly took out the ink bottle he got from the cave abode in front of him, and checked it again. Sure enough, the words inside were really similar to the words of the Dawn Rain continent's Taoist sect. Xiaohua was too happy before and didn't notice it. It seems. Xiaohua put away the ink bottle and thought to himself. The Dawn Rain continent's Taoist sect must have retreated from the hidden Immortal continent. No, from the 3 continents. In other words, the 3 continents' immortals and Buddhas didn't destroy the Taoist sect. Our Taoist sect just went to another realm. From then on, we were separated from the 3 continents' Confucian cultivators and Buddhist sections. Similarly, the Dawn Rain continent's Buddhism annihilation isn't completely correct. It's just that the Taoist sect. That's not right. If our Taoist sect retreated to the Dawn Rain continent's realm, then how do we explain the Buddhist sect's ruins on the Dawn Rain continent? Could it be that the Buddhist sect and Confucian cultivators chased the Taoist sect to the Dawn Rain continent's realm? Thinking of this, Xiaohua couldn't help but gasp. His eyes widened and he almost cried out. Could it be that the Dawn Rain continent was originally a part of the 3 continents? No, it's one of the 4 great continents. Xiaohua was completely stunned. His gaze was fixed on the words on the jade bottles. His mind was spinning rapidly again. That's right, if the Buddhist sect and Confucian cultivators didn't cross realms to chase the Taoist sect to the Dawn Rain continent, then there was another possibility. The Dawn Rain continent, the hidden Immortal continent, the Western Paradise, and the 1,000 Demons Sacred Realm were all in the same realm. However, the Dawn Rain continent where the Taoist sect was entrenched was separated from the 3 continents where the Confucian, Buddhist, and Demon sects were. The place that was separated in the middle was Xiaohua's Kuei-ha-Si. It was the 3 great formations that Xiaohua encountered at the bottom of Kuei-ha-Si, the Great Meru Buddhist formation, the 5 Elements Annihilation formation, and the Clear Time Demon formation. 13. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.